Monday, March 28th. This is the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. And we're taking up two items today. The first is an amendment to the Master Plan for Historic Preservation for the Potomac Overlook Committee. And the second is our continuing review of the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Master Plan. So the council got a briefing on this, on the Potomac Overlook. And we're taking it now to the committee. And we are joined by of course, council staff. Pamela Dunn prepared the packet. We've got Gwen Wright, Rebecca Ballo, John Lieberts from the planning department and the historic team. And I'll turn it to you, Pam, to kick us off, and then we'll hear from our historic preservation folks.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Correct, as the chair just mentioned, this amendment to the master plan for historic preservation is to create a historic district for the Potomac Overlook neighborhood, and it contains 19 houses that are located approximately 2.5 miles to the southwest of downtown Bethesda, and they overlook the Potomac River. This had a public hearing. We only had one speaker, and at the day of the public hearing, yes, you were briefed by planning staff on this amendment to the master plan for historic preservation. So rather than me just reading through the staff report and giving the highlights of the district, I think it would be better if we turn it over to historic preservation staff to let them give you the highlights of this effort to amend the master plan. And I'll just note that also in the packet today, you do have a draft of the resolution. Typically, these amendments, they sometimes come before committee, sometimes they will go straight to council. When they do go to council, there'll be a resolution to amend the master plan. And so there is a draft of that resolution also attached to the staff report. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to planning staff.
Great. Well, thank you, Pam. And as you noted, we did get a briefing at the full council. And so I know everyone is generally familiar. This is a beautiful community. It's a notable example of mid-century architecture and planning. And it sounds like, this is an opportunity to maintain that into the future. It's not the only community designed in this manner. There are a number of others around the county, but it appears that the owners of the properties have agreed and sort of rallied around this idea. And so here we are today with the opportunity to approve a historic district, which will ensure that any major changes, would have to be, any real changes to the exterior of the buildings would have to go through a historic work permit and approval. And for the effort of doing that, the property owners are eligible for a pretty substantial tax benefits, about 25% of the cost of the project for those elements of a project that are approved, which is, again, as I said, pretty substantial. And so, it enables the owners to, I think there's an incentive there to support having designation, because sure, they could sell their properties perhaps at some point now or some point in the future and have them mansionized and probably make more money. So, we appreciate the owner's interest in preservation, and I think that's kind of what this is about. So I know they're all very proud to live in these homes and want to ensure that that continues. So, Ms. Wright, Ms. Ballo, Mr. Lieberts.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm very, very proud of our historic preservation staff, Rebecca Ballo and John Lieberts, who are going to be here to talk about the specific nomination. And, we haven't had a historic district designated in probably close to 10 years. And this is fantastic. I'm really also proud of the fact that they have gone well beyond looking at just the architecture of this community. They've really, really studied the history of the community and the people who lived in these mid-century modern houses. And that really goes to show that historic preservation is both about the buildings, but it's also about the people and the history of the activities that went on in those buildings. So I'd like to turn it over to Rebecca and John. And I also want to acknowledge Jason Sartori, who's here, who is the chief of the division that our historic preservation section is located in. So Rebecca or John, if you'd like to take it over.
Thank you. Good morning, Director Wright. Good morning, council members, and thank you for having us here this morning. And thank you to Ms. Pam Dunn for the introduction and for the supportive report from the council staff. We gave some background information at the conclusion of the public hearing last month, at the beginning of the month. It was on March the 1st, I believe, the first day of Women's History Month. But I would like to run through this again very, very briefly for everybody, just to give a background about the geographic area, the architectural significance of the neighborhood, and again, highlighting some of the important, notable county residents who were early purchasers of Potomac Overlook, whose homes were also calling out, and we'll go through this really quickly. The planning board is recommending that the county council find that the Potomac Overlook Historic District meets the designation criteria outlined in Chapter 24A of the County Code, and approve an amendment to the master plan for historic preservation to designate Potomac Overlook as a historic district. Next slide, please. So again, we went through this a little bit, but I would like to call it out again. I think it's important about our public process and outreach that has been ongoing for this master plan amendment since 2019. The community came to us to ask what they could do to protect their neighborhood and their homes, and also to share the broader history, to share the story of this special neighborhood with the county. And so our office partnered with the neighborhood in 2019 and 2020 to research the history of their homes, to prepare the historic district designation report, and also to prepare the design guidelines that will be the governing document for the community, in addition to the covenants that are already active within Potomac Overlook. We worked with them for approximately a year and a half, and then brought the master plan amendment forward to public hearings at the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Board at 2021. We had our public hearing here in 2022, and are preparing, to move it forward to the next phase. Next slide, please. Again, just a little bit of background about the designation criteria in Chapter 24A. There are basically two buckets of designation criteria. The council can find that a district or a site meet any one, having to do with historical and cultural significance, and then architectural and design significance. Next slide, please. So about the district itself, again, as Ms. Dunn mentioned, there are 19 properties in total. What you see here is the map of the neighborhood. All of these properties would be covered by the historic district boundary, which our ordinance refers to as the environmental setting for the neighborhood. We've called out 12 properties as contributing resources, 5 as outstanding resources, and 2 as non-contributing resources. And this is also standard within our historic district amendments, that we have different tiers of resources within the district. This is standard in Chevy Chase, Tacoma Park, Greenwich Forest, which was our last district, as Director Wright mentioned, about 10 years ago. And it just sets different types of review is called out within the design guidelines for each of these types of resources. Next slide.
Rebecca, sorry to interrupt you, but is the non-contributing, are those because those houses have already been modified so much that they're no longer representative?
Yes, exactly that. Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. One of the houses that's non-contributing is entirely new construction. And then the other house has been altered so much over the years. A portion of it had burned down and had been altered, so that it could no longer be contributing architecturally, but it is still contained within the district.
And then the contributing, have those also been modified, or they're just not as grand as the outstanding?
So many of the contributing resources have been modified, and within the larger plan amendment document, John Liebertz and Casey Roan from our office did go out, and they undertook a property by property building analysis to show, has this property had a garage filled in? Has this had its windows changed out? Things like that. And so we have cataloged each of those changes, but they are still architecturally significant. You can still see that the original plan model is there. So we really consider those to be minor alterations. For the outstanding resources, 4 of the 5 outstanding resources, we called those out having to do with the specific individuals who lived there. And we talk about those individuals later on in the report. And then the 5th outstanding resource is the model home for the community. It was the first one that was built and is almost entirely unaltered from the time of its construction.
Thanks.
All right, next slide. So again, very briefly, we went into a lot of this in the report. Potomac Overlook is an 8-acre subdivision that was platted by Edmund Bennett, John Matthews, and Lloyd Potter in the late 1950s, designed by architects Arthur Keyes and Donald Lethbridge. It's a significant example of a contemporary style tract housing development in Montgomery County, really beginning, kickstarting the era of the mid-century modern subdivisions and starting to try and pull away from the colonial revival style that was really very dominant in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Next slide, please. Again, the architectural significance of the community is associated with these master architects and significant developers. And the environmental planning that went into Potomac Overlook is of particular significance because the detailed site planning and design of this community respected the existing topography, the preservation of the natural environment, and the way that each lot was platted, and then the way that each house was situated on that lot was very carefully considered so that it looked as if the subdivision had always been there within the middle of this heavily wooded, steep slope area adjacent to the Potomac River. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, 4 of our 5 outstanding resources are associated with significant individuals who lived at Potomac Overlook. These noted owners included Pouchy and Yu-Ming Pian, Dorothy Guilford, Helen Wilson Neese, and Abraham and Ellen Sorkin. And their achievements reflected the themes of Asian American heritage, Jewish American heritage, women's history, law, mathematics, science, and engineering. Next slide. As I mentioned before, Pouchy and Yu-Ming Pian, their achievements reflect Asian American heritage, women's history, and excellence in science and engineering. Next slide. Dorothy Guilford was a high-level federal official in the Washington, D.C. government, and her leadership in mathematics and statistics shaped national projects and policies, again, particularly in the fields of defense and education. And I'll say, too, that in the write-up, we have multi-page, write-ups about each of these individuals and their careers in Montgomery County and within the federal government as well. Next slide, please. So then we have Judge Helen Neese, and she's significant at the local, state, and national level as the first woman to serve on the United States Court of Customs and Patent Appeals, the Federal Circuit, and then as the Chief Judge of the Federal Circuit Court. Next slide, please.
You said she was the first woman to be elevated as a Chief Judge?
My notes. Or John, do you have that off the top of your? Yes, she was. We find her right up there.
First woman to serve on the Federal Circuit as a Chief Judge.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's on the Federal Circuit. So not the first woman to be elevated as a Chief Judge, but a Chief Judge on the Federal Circuit. So that's the distinction between that.
Interesting. All right.
Thank you, John. So the Sorkins are significant at the local, state, and national level. For Abraham Sorkin, stemming from his World War II military service and career with the United States Information Agency, and then Helen as an economic analyst during the Marshall Plan in Europe. And then after her professional career had concluded, when they moved to Potomac Overlook, they started to raise their family. Helen became re-engaged in the Potomac Overlook effort in the 1990s to reconstitute the Covenants Committee, and she became a passionate supporter and of the design and preservation of Potomac Overlook, and was a supporter of the preservation of the community from the 1990s, and for the next couple of decades after that. Next slide, please. So I'd like to turn now to the design guidelines, unless would the committee want to ask any questions at this point about the people or any of the significance, or should I just continue with the briefing on the design guidelines?
I think we can continue. All right.
So Potomac Overlook, since its founding, has had a Covenants Committee. The Covenants Committee reviews and approves all additions, structures, outbuildings, and fencing within the subdivision. Property owners are required to submit plans in writing to the committee for approval. And so this requirement has existed for decades already, and it will continue, to exist even if we were not designating the community as historic. The design guidelines that the staff and the HPC wrote in consultation with the community are an extension of the requirements of the Covenants Committee, and they rely upon that existing framework that has already been established and that has been working for the community for many decades. Next slide, please. So very briefly, just to walk you through the layout of the design guidelines, which I know you've had the opportunity to review the digital as well as the physical copies that were transmitted. It's broken up into 6 sections, and this document is really the working document for the neighborhood. We expect that the historical write-up will certainly be very interesting, and many people have expressed interest in having their copy of it, but we imagine that the design guidelines this is where people are meant to be able to go to see if I want to add a patio, if I want to add an addition, what do I have to do? What does my contractor need to know, and how do I go about? This is kind of the nuts and bolts document about how the district will be administered. Next slide, please. So as part of that, we have a lot of information in the design guidelines, again, to help owners and their contractors determine, when is a historic area work permit required? When can a historic area work permit be potentially approved by the staff? And when is a historic area work permit or another kind of permit not required at all? And of course, our office is always available to take people's questions, their phone calls, their emails, but this is kind of a quick and handy guide to get people started. Next slide, please. So again, I just like to wrap up with going back to some of my earlier slides about the recommendations. So the staff has found that Potomac Overlook meets 4 designation criteria as laid out in Chapter 24A, 2 having to deal with historical and cultural significance, that the neighborhood is significant for the development heritage or because of the development heritage or cultural characteristic of the county, and it's also identified with persons who influence society. And then second, 2 criteria having to do with architectural and design significance, that Potomac Overlook embodies distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, and that the neighborhood is the resulting work of a master, in this case, the collaboration between Bennett and KLC. Next slide, please. So I would just conclude wrapping up our recommendation that we recommend that the council find that the historic district meets these 4 designation criteria, and then approve the amendment to the master plan for historic preservation to designate Potomac Overlook as a master plan historic district. And that concludes my brief presentation, and John and I are happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you. Don't think this is a terribly controversial one, so any other discussion items? Otherwise, we can approve this. All right. Well, thank you for your work. Very interesting to hear. You're out there, surveying the properties and inventorying them and so forth. There's a lot of effort goes in. So thanks for doing that. And look forward to preserving this moment in time as an enduring one. Thank you. All right. Well, show of hands to approve this. Very good. All approved. Thank you very much. We'll see Rebecca and Joe. We'll see you back again next time. All right. Now we're going to move on to the Silver Spring Downtown Plan, continuing our extensive review. We've got parks and public facilities, transportation particularly. So we got a pretty meaty topic here today. I don't know about a hard stop, certainly 12:30 at the latest, but let's see if we can maybe get through this a little faster than that. But we'll see. Okay, Pam, why don't you pick up where we were?
Thank you. So we are now turning to the second item for today. As you mentioned, it's the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Community Plan work session. There are two main things being covered, as you also mentioned, which is the section, the plan-wide recommendations related to parks, trails, and public spaces. And the second will be related to transportation, although there will also be a review of the fiscal impact statement that was received from the county executive. The first page of the staff report had indicated we would cover schools. That's not covered today. And it also indicated that we had added a work session on April 1st, but that date has not worked out for everyone involved. So the next work session, I just want to be clear for anyone who's following along, will be April 4th. That's the next work session. And I believe the next added date is April 7th. Those are recent changes. So with that, we will start in with the parks review. And I just want to also mention that we had a central staff colleague, Carlos Camacho, who was with us for the past couple of years. He has only recently left to take on a big parks role in the city of Baltimore. But before he left, he had worked on this section. He had worked with the parks staff in his review. And so that is really the basis for a lot of what we're covering this morning when we go through the parks section. So I just wanted to mention Carlos. We're sorry that he's not with us. So on the second page of the staff report, we dive right into the plan-wide recommendations for parks, trails, and public spaces. As noted, the goal of the plan as it relates to parks, trails, and open spaces do support the four overarching themes of the plan itself, which are diversity, connectivity, resiliency, and community health. As the plan states, they were developed in alignment with policy guidance from numerous and previous plans, such as the 2010 Silver Spring CBD Green Space Guidelines, the 2017 Parks, Recreation, and Open Space, or commonly referred to as the PROS Plan, and the 2018 Energized Public Spaces Functional Master Plan. The overall or broad-reaching goals for this section are to encourage physical activity. I'm going to not read every word of this. It is in the staff report, so if you're following along, you can read the more detailed version, but because we do have a lot to cover, I'm just going to paraphrase. So the goals are to encourage physical activity, facilitate social interaction, steward the environment within the urban context, and promote economic prosperity by creating fun, appealing park facilities and programming that energize Silver Spring, while also celebrating its history and its culture. So, there are recommendations in a couple different topic areas presented in the plan. The first one is equity, and it states that these recommendations strive to promote a fair distribution of parks and public spaces that contribute to improving community health and are accessible to all. To increase equity in the plan area, the plan recommends adding additional park facilities and programming that promote physical activity to ensure a fair distribution of the park experience across the various districts, to facilitate the creation of new and the renovation of existing parks and public spaces that accommodate multiple needs, to promote facilities that celebrate cultural and historical aspects of the community, serve the distinct social connection needs of seniors, teenagers, young adults, and people with disabilities, and contribute to the sense of pride and ownership of the parks. Another recommendation is to expand the urban tree canopy coverage and pervious surfaces in the parks and public spaces, and to engage stakeholders such as property owners, developers, nonprofits, community members, artists, and public agencies to collaborate in delivering creative solutions and development strategies within these parks. Those broad overarching recommendations related to equity in the park and public spaces, staff supports all of these, doesn't have any questions. I don't know if the committee wants to weigh in there.
Seem like the right objectives.
Okay, we'll keep moving unless you have a question. The next is broad recommendations related to the Green Loop connectivity. They are to implement the proposed Green Loop to connect existing and proposed parks and public spaces with other land uses, to ensure access to all parks and public spaces, including pop-up parks that are designed to support casual, impromptu use in connection with nature and other land uses, to improve signage and wayfinding of the parks, public spaces, and trails, and again, to promote physical activity such as people watching, social connections, and integration of amenities in the parks and public spaces with internal walking loops, both within the parks themselves or in the spaces and to the Green Loop itself. The plan in the beginning, so early in the downtown Silver Spring adjacent communities plan, there's an entire section on connecting the districts, and it includes subsections on the Green Loop and connecting across the rails. Again, as it relates to park, in theory, of course, staff supports these ideas. We just want to mention that the more details of the Green Loop are going to be covered as part of your transportation conversation coming up today. So not focusing on it as a park facility, but as a connector, and so as a connector will be covered in transportation. So the last sort of topic area of recommendation in this section is creative implementation. It really is a recommendation to consider short-term temporary solutions and pop-up programming that reflect community identity within temporary or interim parks. And what you'll see later in the section where Parks lists out all the different facilities that are being proposed for this sector plan, you'll see that many of them are being recommended as POPs. So they're recommended either in places where the programming might change or the location might change within that vicinity. They are temporary in nature, not in ownership by MNC PPC.
POPs are privately owned public spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So we have plenty of those in Silver Spring, especially South Silver Spring, I think.
Yeah.
And okay.
Oh, pardon me. There's one more general area, topic area of recommendations called equity in park and public spaces implementation. Silver Spring has been identified as an implementation priority area through the mapping of experience improvement areas of the Energized Public Spaces Plan, something the park system evaluated, and with an overlay of the department's equity focus area. Those two things coincide in Silver Spring, and contribute to this goal to address the distribution of park resources in the county's urbanizing area, give voice to the underserved communities, and contribute to the efforts initiated by the County Council on Racial Equity and Social Justice. So for that broad goal, there are 3 recommendations. They're little, they overlap some of the things you've already heard. Promote a fair distribution of attractive, safe, and fun parks and public spaces as common civic spaces with facilities and programming. Prioritize and identify opportunity sites, test scenarios to measure the impact of additional development on park facilities to better address distribution of resources. And utilize the EFAs and EIAs, as were just mentioned, the experience improvement areas tool and the equity focus area tools to prioritize funding and implementation for parks and public space projects. And staff supports these recommendations. So if you have any questions.
Yeah, question there, please, Mr. Chairman. Could we just, these are great goals, I agree, the ones above. And is there, could the planning give an example or two of what this will look like or has looked like in other places, or what you have, just to put some meat on the bones of how you think you can implement these goals, which are really good goals?
Well, I'll let Christina talk to the specifics, but you'll recall that the Energized Public Spaces Plan developed a pretty rigorous methodology for evaluating shortages of different kinds, not just parks generically, but specific types of park experiences. So we would be looking to that methodology, and that evaluates every single, I believe it's square acre in these urban areas, including Silver Spring, and says, where are the places where there's a gap in terms of the walking distance to an active experience, a contemplative experience, and a social experience in a park. So it's not just that we have a methodology to say, where are there park shortages? We have a methodology to say, where is there a shortage of a specific kind of thing that you might want to get out of a park? And we would be applying that to try to understand where are the gaps and where are the places that people in a place like in and around downtown Silver Spring don't have a short walk to all 3 of those things.
Yes, this is Christina Sasaki from, I'm a park planner for the Silver Spring. And thank you, Chairman, for the overview. Silver Spring is actually the first sector plan where we're applying the EPS plan methodology. But in short, you can imagine like a sort of a Google map system. You can click in any of that grid and it will show a 10-minute walk shed. And we evaluate what are the facilities there are within that area. Traditionally, a lot of jurisdictions are doing 10-minute walk to a park, but understanding that, a park could be, just a playground or could be a park full of activities and experiences. So we want to be sort of fair with the community and we want to make sure that people can walk to different things to do, especially in the urban areas and especially considering that our county is very diverse. So that gives us an idea of within a sector plan, not being specific about, oh, we need a playground or we need a skate park, but we need more active, contemplative, and social activities. So we have a good balance of those. So what we've done in this sector plan for the first time, we look at all the menu of potential facilities that could contribute to the lack of active recreation that we have in Silver Spring and urban areas in general. And then we look at the demand that the planning department put together in terms of, future zoning. And we calculate the impact because this tool allows us to do how many walkable experience points you have per person. So we also calculate the supply. So we calculate the future supply of potential facilities, the future demand of population. And the good news is that with a lot of these proposed private-owned public spaces and also public parks and MNCPC-owned parks, we are going to be in the future better with the proposal than we are before, even including the upcoming demand.
I appreciate that. And I asked the question because I thought this was the first time we were actually, using it in this way. So,
yes.
So that'll be interesting to track and see. And obviously, as with any of these tools, we've got to make sure that they're promoted and we get feedback and we make them better. And I know you all will have a process to do that, but I'm excited to see how it works. So thank you for giving that overview.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So just to be clear here, Pam, we're talking about the overall goals, but we're not going park by park just yet?
Yes, that is actually the next section, are the proposed park locations and recommendations for each of the individual types of parks.
Gotcha. All right, great. I'm looking at my screen, folks. So if, please use your hand device or something. Don't be patient with me if I don't immediately see that you want to speak. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are at the bottom of page 4 of the staff report, which does indicate council staff support for the recommendations we were just discussing related to the equitable implementation of park and public spaces. The plan then provides proposed park locations and recommendations, and in the 2017 and 2022 upcoming PROS plans and the 2018 EPS plan, it states that each master plan should recommend an interconnected system of parks that achieve multiple objectives. The size and functions of the parks and its facilities should be directly proportional to proposed density and land use patterns of that community. In the staff report, you'll see a copy of map 21, which is in the plan, which illustrates the proposed location of parks and public spaces throughout the plan and as it connects to the Green Loop system. And the overall recommendations, again, for this section related to making, identifying park locations is for the plan area. Park locations should seek opportunities to provide active, contemplative, and social gathering experiences. So just mentioned the chair talking about this. And for each district, parks and public spaces should seek to provide recreational amenities that can be accessed by walking or biking or supported by the Green Loop connections. And if you want to see the map in the staff report, it's on page 6. And then we get into each of the proposed locations, whether they be privately owned parks, public spaces, the POPs, or those owned by MNC PPC. And they are all categorized by type of facility. And the first one is at the bottom of page 6. It's called the Civic Green. These are parks and public spaces that emphasize social gathering as their primary focus. There is recommendation to create one in the Ripley district called Ripley District Civic Green, of approximately a ½ acre in size. 1.5 acres would be ideal, but up to a minimum of a ½ acre. The second is to create a Gene Lynch Civic Green, which we know is currently under construction. This is right near the metro. And a third is to create the Blair Park and called the Terrace public open space or Civic Green, which is currently under the Blair Master Plan. I don't know if you want to discuss any of these civic greens before moving on to plazas.
I don't see any hands. Okay.
The next are plazas. We have one recommendation here. Plazas are spaces aligned with and complement the civic green urban park subcategory. These spaces emphasize social gathering as well. There's one recommendation for what's called Sunny's Park, which is also currently approved under the Blair's plan. And then we move to countywide urban recreational parks. These are oriented to the recreational needs of surrounding neighborhoods and districts, so quite large. This type of park provides space for many activities. And in this section, we have Jessup Blair Park, which has been the topic of conversation before now, and we've talked about the different districts, particularly South Silver Spring District, and in testimony. Jessup Blair Park is a little more than 14 acres, the largest park in the whole plan area, and is designated in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. You will see on the top of page 8.
You said the park is
well,
the Master Plan for Historic Designation? No, the house, right? What?
The house within it, but I'll let Parks weigh in.
Right. Not the park itself, but the house. It's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, that's correct. Chair, this is Darren Flecher, Parks. The house, so part of the park is designated for historic, the setting around the house. But there's plenty of opportunities that are not impacted by that designation in the park.
It's kind of like an oasis in the midst of the park.
It's a section of the park, yeah.
Okay.
Right, and you can see that on page 8 of the staff report. You'll see an illustration that was provided in the plan. It's called the Illustrative Concept for Jessup Blair Urban Recreational Park. It does show there are 3 colored areas, and the top colored area, which is green, called the contemplative zone, is where the Jessup Blair house is located. So Parks is currently developing a concept plan for this area. And so concurrent with the effort of the master plan, they've been able to reach out to the community to get feedback and take advantage of all the communications related to the plan to also have input on what to do about Jessup Blair Park and to develop this preliminary concept plan. You will note that in this master plan, they have included much of the text of this preliminary concept plan recommendations, and the committee can go through those. I just want to mention that it is unusual to have a concept plan in a master plan. Master plan is 20 years. A little more unusual is that this is called a preliminary concept plan recommendations, and so I don't know how that will hold up over time or with a.
Thank you for saying that. So I'm a little confused too. Like, first of all, I like what I see. On the other hand, I'm worried that it would seem that we are making some kind of specific plan through this master plan. I think it's more of a vision than a plan. And I think the intent here is to provide a clear record that the use of this park is going to change. That's the vision of the plan. It's not going to be the way it is today. Because today, in my view, it is a little bit too quiet. And it's in a funny location when you think about access. And as a result, it has never quite gotten a level of use that you would think for a 14.5 acre park, in Silver Spring. And so I certainly believe that the use needs to become more regional than local. And that's the vision of the plan, is to find things that can really attract people from a little bit of a further distance, because in Silver Spring, there are actually a lot of parks in the perimeter of Silver Spring. They're not in the downtown as much, but they are in the adjacent communities. There are a lot of parks in the adjacent communities. and adjacent neighborhoods have plenty of places to go, with the exception of South Silver Spring. There are plenty of places to go for a park. And I think that's one of the reasons why folks haven't really had to go to Jessup Blair all that often. And so it has been underutilized, in my opinion, and I think in your opinion, because that's why you're shifting this to flag this as we got to think a little bit of how to attract people into this space. And there are some elements here that could be very useful. There are 2 parking garages with the college that are within a few hundred yards of the park. And, that's an asset potentially for future uses. I don't know how much you need that or not, but they're there. And that's not, not a lot of places where you have essentially way more parking than I think you might need if you were to kind of approach it in that way. But in any event, I think we need the record to show we're talking about a different new vision. At the same time, any of these specific elements could change. Chair Anderson.
Yeah, we agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. The reason that we feel it's important to have more specificity than you would usually see, I would say it's not unprecedented to have some specific conceptual drawings like you see in this plan, although it is not typical. But the reason we feel that it's important to have that kind of specificity, that if we do not put a very fine point on this, there will be pushback. There are people who believe this park should be kept pretty much as is, that it should be mostly a passive, open space, and really it's got everything it needs right now. And if you do not include in this master plan a very clear and specific statement that it is the policy of this county council and the county that this should have active uses in it, that it should be a draw for social gathering, that it should have all these things, and that it should support a much more intensive set of uses, including amenities and infrastructure to support them, then it will make it much harder to achieve that. So that's why we have more specificity. That's not to say that these drawings are the definitive and last word on what should be in the park, but we believe that it's important to include them at least by way of illustration to show the level of intensity of development of this park that would support all those uses that I think we all, at least among the PHED committee and the planning board and the staff, agree is appropriate and sets a very clear recalibration of the expectations for this park for the future.
And I'll just add that even within what you just said, the schematic approach here retains a very large area that is contemplative, that is the quieter use. And if you know the park well, there's almost like a sparse forest that goes from the Jessup Blair House to Georgia Avenue, and you're maintaining that. It's the other parts of the park that would be intensified.
And we hope to show with these drawings that all those things are possible, that this park can do all 3 of those things: contemplative, social, and active, and preserve the contemplative or more natural features. And we think that these drawings highlight that that's possible, and at least one way in which that could be accomplished.
Great. Okay. We can continue here. Is this when we'll also talk about the house, Pam?
Yeah. So just one thing, I'll recircle on this before we move away from it to get the committee's input. And after listening to Chair Anderson, it might be that we can work with planning and park staff just to modify the language slightly to, rather than make the plan seem as if it is also approving the concept plan, that it is providing a vision for the park that includes these elements, not changing the elements at which the board and the park staff think are important to think about, and the committee can weigh in their approval for that, as a vision for the area, and that the illustration is one example of how this could be achieved, and just slightly move the language away from indicating that the approval of the master plan is also an approval for a concept plan for the park, but all the language otherwise can remain.
That's fine. I would agree with that. I think. And then tell us the timeline on the functional or the whatever the plan is for the actual plan of the park.
This is Christina Sasaki. So for the facility plan of the entire park, for the renovation of the park, we're going to start a formal solicitation process this summer. We are hiring a consultant to do the facility plan process. And for the parallel process of the formal process for the historic house, we are working with our culture resources in order to be able to identify the partner who's going to do the renovation of historic houses. So there are two parallel processes happening.
Okay, great. So this summer, there will be a kickoff of an actual implementation plan.
For the facility plan, yes.
For the facility plan for the park. So that's why you get into all of these actual questions.
Yes.
Again, I just want to note, as Darren said, the historic designation is intended to apply to the house and a certain amount of the setting. Is there an actual geographic boundary for that, or how is it defined?
The entire park is part of the master plan for historic preservation, so that means that we're going to go through the Historic Preservation Commission. And in fact, we already started a conversation. December 15, we went to the Historic Preservation Commission, and we shared the vision of the plan with the preliminary concept. They were on board. They said that we were heading in the right direction. They agreed with the goal to increase visibility and accessibility for the park. And they were also excited about the idea of adding new activities and facilities to attract a more diverse audience to make it a regional destination.
And why is the whole park on the plan? I just want to make a real quick diversion here. I've read in there several times about this park's history with the Underground Railroad. I read Escape from the Pearl. And what I read seemed to say that the two sisters who were escaping slavery were apprehended in about this location by the Blair family and returned into imprisonment. Is that what you're referring to with the history of this property?
No. So a couple of things, and Rebecca can jump in and clarify. The entire property is the environmental setting, with the house being the existing structure. This is very common with historic sites where the parcel on which a property is located is the environmental setting. It's really important to understand that just because something is an environmental setting, it does not mean that no change can happen within that setting. Lots and lots of change can happen within environmental settings. That's what we worked through when the bridge from Montgomery College was built within the park. It actually required the demolition of two small structures that were in Jessup Blair Park near where the bridge has landed. So we've been through these discussions about change within the environmental setting for many, many, many years. In terms of the history of the park, what is, at least that I'm aware of, what is shown in a marker right along Georgia Avenue is something called the Chaplin or Chapman incident. Essentially, an individual who was helping two enslaved people, not the women from the Pearl, two gentlemen, to escape in a carriage, was chased down by people who were trying to reclaim those individuals. And there was a gun battle, and both the individual who was an abolitionist who was trying to free the two individuals was captured, as well as one of the enslaved people, the other enslaved person, escaped. I mean, it was a dramatic.
I think incident. That's the same historic episode. It's possible I got my details incorrect.
And it has nothing to do with the Pearl. But
well, I did.
I don't know
it did.
Rebecca or
it actually
John
was part of that.
Want to talk about that?
Thank you, Director. I really don't have anything else to add. It was indeed the Chaplin incident in 1850 that did happen in proximity to the Jessup Blair Mansion. All I would add to, Director Wright captured it perfectly. The designation, we manage change in these master plan historic sites all the time. The Historic Preservation Commission was unanimous in their excitement, frankly, about what the park staff had to present in terms of activation of the park and their conceptual ideas and framework for this site. If anything, the vice chair at the time, who was a resident of East Silver Spring, said she would like to see more of it, that they really believe in bringing, life to this park. And there are many histories, many layers of history having to do with Native American occupation, the Jessup Blair family, enslavement on the property that are all part of the designation. I'll say as well, having the site designated as a master plan site, we work closely with our teams in parks in the archaeology department with Cassandra Michaud and her team to make sure that for any ground disturbance, and we mentioned this in the plan as well, that there's a wonderful opportunity here for further archaeological discoveries to better interpret the grounds as well as the house all together within the park, and really bring new educational opportunities to the public. So for the historic preservation planning side, we're excited about the possibilities in this plan, and the Historic Preservation Commission is as well, and looks forward to working with the Parks Department and the partner that they will be bringing forward.
Okay, so as an example, the intensified use that we see in the schematic here is not inconsistent at all with preservation and designation. And that's the critical thing. And okay. All right. Sounds good. To touch on the house briefly, a number of years ago, I pushed really hard to get funding into the budget for the house to be stabilized and renovated. It had been housing, and it needed a complete overhaul. I think we got about half that money, I understand, was spent. The other half ended up being used on another historic preservation purpose. But the property has been stabilized. Some $400,000 has been spent. And at the moment, there really isn't a plan for how the property could be finished out and then utilized. And this isn't really where we would decide that. That is an operational type of question, and where funding could come from for all, those are all questions that we don't really speak to in a master plan. I know there is a community group, the Create Arts Center, and a number of others that are very interested with the idea of, partnering with the county to finish off the space and making it a community gathering space, programming space. I think that's a really intriguing idea. And I'm quite interested in it, but I don't think that we would really, seek to establish that through a master plan, since a master plan is a 20-year document, and we don't quite know whether that actually is viable yet. So we certainly want to keep a door open to, I think we want to say we'd like to see the building finished and available for community use. I don't know what more we would need to say in a master plan about it than that. Darren, I see if you can add some comment here.
I was just going to say we concur with that approach, which is that we're developing a process to identify a tenant, and believe that's outside of the master plan process.
Okay, perhaps that'd be part of your functional plan. I don't know, but okay. So that is all ahead of us. That is all separate and different. I think the community groups have generated a lot of interest and excitement through this whole process, and that they can continue that momentum into a more, into the more specific arena where it is can be effectuated. All right. What else we have for Jessup Blair here?
Well, the one thing I would ask is whether, because we did receive testimony about the house in the setting of the park, not so much what has to be done with it has to be in the master plan. But whether it warrants a recommendation in this section that the continued renovation and preservation of the house is a goal of the plan or a recommendation in the plan for future community use, and leave it at that. I think there was some concern there was just a lack of mention of the house in this section. Or if planning wants to weigh in, is it more appropriate to include this somewhere in the historic resources portion of the plan? But I think the community that weighed in was concerned that there was lack of attention to the Jessup Blair House as something in Silver Spring to at least mention as a resource and a valued asset.
Okay. Well, I think it should be mentioned. I mean, it is a cool asset. It's just, obviously, I don't understand why it would cost so much to finish it off. Hopefully the end budget for that will be far more affordable than the numbers that I've seen. But it's something that seems like it'd be quite useful. So, if it was finished, I think there's lots of interesting ways that it could be used. And certainly we're hearing from a community coalition about one potential use, and that's very interesting. There could be others. We'll just have to proceed into an open process. And I think the county has to figure out how much money it can afford to devote to finishing the building, which, obviously there's many competing priorities. So there's a lot to figure out there. So I don't think we should be silent. That would, I don't think we want to avoid, a quick exposition of the vision that for the house to say we anticipate it's a community resource and part of the many ways that the park could be used. Okay, continue.
Okay, so if there are no more comments or concerns with this section, the next type of park that the plan mentions is the community use urban recreational park. These plans or these parks serve the immediate neighborhood. Physical activity is the main emphasis of the community use urban recreational park, but social opportunities are also considered. And you'll see on page 9, there's a list of 6, parks that are either recommended to be created. One is the South Silver Spring Park. We know that MNC PPC recently acquired that land. There are others that are recommended as non-owned by MNC PPC. They're all listed there. And the last one is to renovate or repurpose Ellsworth Park. Again, we know that's already owned and is adjacent to the old library site. I don't know if there's any questions or comments on any of these.
Okay, now for these, are we going to have a place where we talk about them more individually? Or if we want to see something, I think this must be it, actually. This is the place.
Yes.
All right, so I wanted to just bring up South Silver Spring Park for starters. So this is the property that you just purchased. Very exciting. Remind us, is it all state money? Is it partially state and county? How did you fund that?
This was a local money from our acquisition, and we kind of distribute,
ALARF.
local, focus versus sometimes a portion of parks open space. So I can get back to you in terms of the details because then the acquisition manager is not here.
That's
but
okay.
I know
that's okay. I just wanted to start with understanding that. So you have a fund that you build. I think you might take developer payments into it, or you have various ways of getting revenue into it, and you use that occasionally to purchase new land. And so you use that here. You bought the properties. It's separate from the cost of building the park. The thing I wanted to add, and I'll ask Pam to work on some language, many of us have been advancing this idea that the Caldor building on Kenneth Street should be an educational facility. And in fact, we're excited to see Planning Board has, also spelled that out in this master plan. I think if there's going to be an urban park that is literally adjacent to that building, it could be designed to support that educational use also. So I don't think you would have missed that, if we're proceeding with the opportunity at the Caldor building, which is still in its infancy. But I just wanted to add that to the language, that it could support the educational use, and just make sure that there is a common approach to that area. And we're not saying, well, the school system is on its own. If there is, whether it's the college or the school system, will there be on their own for some kind of, recreational amenity for the school where there isn't really a whole lot of space, that you could see this urban park fulfilling that need. One of the ideas we talked about was a high school, a limited high school. And one of the key questions was, well, if there's no, there's no place for recreation, and high schools are supposed to have some space for recreation. And then fortuitously, you bought this. So, I don't know what more is involved, but I would like to see some language saying that, there could be some intentionality here as we proceed.
I just want to make a clarification. So the South Silver Spring Park, the reason we acquired the park is to provide more active and physical activities for the local community, especially the surrounding residents, because it is a very high density area and is going to be receiving new residential development. So it's one of the densest areas on the Silver Spring with more potential to develop. So, and the fact that the location serves locally the South Silver Spring in opposition to regionally, like Jessup Blair. So if there is a future use that is going to be developed, I think, parks always work with neighbors to accommodate different uses. But I'm just not sure if we haven't talked in terms of tying the program of the physical activities directly to a specific user at this point in the sector plan.
Understood. And what I'm saying is, please proceed intentionally around how what you could do could also serve the students or young people.
Okay.
Because, frankly, weekday daytime use is not probably your most intense park time use anyway. So if you can do something that speaks to multiple needs, that would be super helpful for the potential of the Kennett Street property to be the educational facility that your master plan also calls for it to be. So I don't know what that means, to be quite honest, like what kind of facility, that could be. I frankly have no idea, but it seems like a cool opportunity to me in your shoes to design something that could be useful in many, many different ways. So obviously we're not talking about like a track, we're talking about something quite different here. So.
Yeah, I think the main point is this highlights why we need to emphasize the active recreation. I mean,
right.
Our EPPS analysis shows active recreation is needed in this area anyway.
Yeah.
And that would be even more true if you want to have a school use next to it. So I don't want to say that it's
right.
basketball or
right.
football or something specific.
Exactly.
But it would be very active, and we should definitely fend off any suggestion of, just like put some, seating there and it'll be just a nice place for the people in the adjoining apartments to sit and, people watch. It's got to be activated for vigorous physical activity is what we're looking for.
Amen. All right. Let's, and now Acorn Park, is that in this section or is that in the next section? Okay, that's in the next section.
Right. Two sections. So the next section are neighborhood greens. This is a park facility that is flexible, supports social connections, physical activity, and access to nature. And you'll also see at the top of page 10, there are 5 locations for neighborhood greens. One is Fenton Street Park. It's to renovate, expand it. We've talked about that when we talked about the Fenton Village District. Create a Fenton Village Park. We've also talked about that. Ellsworth District Park. There's a number of them on the Blair site. And then there's also one at Falklands. I don't know if there's any questions on these.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next are called pocket greens. These are smaller parks that allow for pauses with a landscaped setting along the streets between larger parks and within the Park and Public Spaces network. They are in some ways connectors, but larger than just a small trail, but a place to pause and have green area. And in this we have three. There's the renovate the Acorn Park. This is where we could talk about the Newell Street issue, or we could put that off until we talk about transportation, but I think Dr. Orland's here. The other, I'll just mention the other two. One is Philadelphia Park, and then the third is King Street Park. We have talked about this one also. This was one we talked about related to the community gardens, and again, there's another issue we might want to talk about today with that. So, but we can start with Acorn Park.
Okay, great. All right, so I don't think that the recommendation for Newell Street as a shared street is quite sufficient. A shared street is a space that is, if I understand it, always open to different users, cars, pedestrians, bikes, and the design is intended to, minimize or promote safety, but in other words, it's always open. It would always be open for cars to drive through. That's certainly how I understand a shared street. And I don't think that quite gets at what we're looking for here. I think that there's an opportunity to do something more significant that would, in a way, treat the street footprint as a plaza, and connect Acorn through a plaza with the pop space that is adjacent to it. I appreciate that we don't yet know what the South Silver Spring Urban Park is going to be like. And, we've just spent a lot of money to buy that property, and we're going to spend a lot more to build it out. And that's really exciting. And that's going to serve that area, very effectively. What the master plan here has called for is to continue the use of Newell Street as, quote unquote, open street, until that park is ready to use. And at that time, this master plan sort of calls for it to shift to an open street, shared street model. I'd like to see a different approach here that recognizes that we don't, I think it's appropriate to make the actual decisions in light of the decisions that will be made for South Silver Spring. So I think the idea of essentially continuing its current use until we really know what's going to happen at South Silver Spring, that seems prudent. But then at the same time, I think we could, spell out that there is still a long-term use there that, would be appropriate. And I think having the county abandon that street for parks to control would make some sense. And it does not mean, I know I'm a little bit fixated here, but the opportunity for a school use at that Kennett Street building is pretty significant. And if we were to make that happen, I'm not sure that we wouldn't need, in the mornings for cars to be able to drive through there. So, I think we don't want to close the door to that possibility, but we don't need to commit that, the street would have to become, always open to cars. I think there's a middle ground where it's actively managed, and it's essentially like a streetscape that can be used for community a lot of the time, and then as it was necessary, bollards could be removed, and school buses could drive through in the morning, or people could drop their kids off. I'm really not saying at all how I think any of that would work. I don't really know. I just want to make sure that we aren't inadvertently closing the door to something that we would need, or setting up an unfair expectation. All these balls are up in the air at the same time. But again, I think the idea here is there's actually a lot of space if you were to connect Acorn and the street and the pop space. And doesn't necessarily require a ton of, well, I can't say what expenditures are required, but I wouldn't want to give that up yet. So I want to see how we can make that a feature. So, Atara.
Thank you. So I'll just expand a little bit on the conversations we've had with DOT and others about recommending it as a shared street. So in the Complete Streets Guide, which is what the Planning Department is now sort of using as our guide to how to look at street typologies, a shared street can be designed in a number of ways. It can be designed in a way that looks more like literally a street that is shared, or it can be designed in a way that looks more like an environment that privileges peds and bikes and lets cars through. So, there's a range of ways it can be designed, and we haven't been specific, of course, about that here because there'd be a whole, process to determine that. But it can be designed in a way that has a different kind of treatment that has a different paving treatment. It's curbless, that has a lot more greenery. And so it also is something that obviously could be, and it's sort of easier to do this when you have a shared street. Close it could be closed on the weekends. It could be closed for events. It could just be a lot of flexibility. I think one of our hesitations, and DOT expressed this as well, about, and it sounds like you do agree with this, about, not wanting to sort of close it or abandon it completely, is because we have so many opportunity sites still in South Silver Spring. The development that's there today is only a sort of a portion of what could be there. Obviously, we have the Days Inn site right on the other side of this, and we know there's a lot being proposed already for that site right now. There are numerous sites. There's a site even right down Newell, which I know we haven't really talked about yet, but one of the things we're proposing in this plan is to take away the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay zone, which will hopefully make some development a little bit easier in South Silver Spring. There's just a lot of potential as we looked at in the South Silver Spring district. And so we want to figure out something that can be flexible. It can serve as an extension of the park when it needs to. It can let cars through if that becomes something that needs to happen and that's necessary for keeping everything moving and access in the neighborhood, et cetera. So that's really where we were coming from, I think, when we decided. We heard a lot from the neighbors on all sides on this, as you know. And sort of our determination to say, let's do a shared street is because it really kind of strikes that balance between allowing access to people who need access there, but really sort of creating an environment that's a lot more pedestrian friendly, that has more of a relationship to the park than not, if that makes sense.
Well, I think the issue is what you just described is, to me, doesn't really come through in the plan here, first of all. So, what I see in the plan is simply a shared street designation. And I think of that as something that is generally open to both cars, bikes, and peds at the same time, is designed to be safe for everyone, versus what you described, which is maybe it's always closed at certain hours. It's a weekend, plaza, you rebuild it without curbs, there's a lot that can be done to allow for this to be a continuing community gathering space, and without being so definitive that cars could never cross through. I don't know. I don't have a reaction to your comment about future opportunity sites and how that might play in or not. But in any event, the first recommendation is to continue this use until the South Silver Spring Urban Park is clear. And I think if we can add language about what the shared street potential uses are, I think that would be very helpful. And kind of build on that. Okay, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you. So I share completely your goal here, and I think it seems to me that planning and does too, and the Parks Department does too. I think the question is whether or not the language as it is does that. I'm thinking quite a lot, and we've talked a bit previously about the wharf and the wonder at the wharf, which does allow cars, but it so heavily favors and is designed so extensively to promote pedestrians that if and when cars do use that space, they use it with such a level of caution because there's an understanding that there will be heavy pedestrian activity there, and really the roadway is designed in such a way to ensure that. That's a shared street. And there are times where that area gets closed off, which is appropriate, and people expect it because of the way it's designed and the type of place that it is. And to me, I see the same opportunity here, and I do think that is part of the shared street concept, at least as I understand it, and as was just shared. So, I think we can accomplish this perhaps by just adding in, shared street, into the shared street language, something about, emphasizing or favoring pedestrians and community gatherings, or something to that effect. I mean, I would be a little bit hesitant of specifically talking about what the future is going to be, because I think that we want to be flexible, as you noted, Mr. Chair, of what that could and should be. But the point is that there are real benefits to design that favors pedestrians and that creates placemaking opportunities and community gathering places where we really rethink what public infrastructure is and can be. And I think this is an example of that. And we have an opportunity to be flexible moving forward. So if there's a way to just add, I think it could be with a matter of 2 or 3 words personally to achieve that. I think that would be helpful. But I ultimately think everybody here shares the same goal. I mean, I think the recommendation, at least as I read it, was intended to do this, and hopefully we can just maybe emphasize that a little bit more so that it's clear to the public, because we have received some feedback from folks who feel like it could be further emphasized to the point that it is now. So
okay. Well, my comment here is I think everything is locational. And I think that if this street is always open for cars, which, would be a initial interpretation of what shared street means, then it will always get cars driving through it to some extent. And I think that, other places that are Wooners might be in a location that it's not that common for cars to want to be anyway, because you've designed a development around, to make that the likely use, would be pedestrians. Whereas I think in this case, it's really part of a street grid that cars are going to use if they can. So I think we have to go a little further here. And again, I like the vision of removing the curbs, having plaza features, but and having it closed, either partially or all the time. And I think the plan could be open about that. To determine when, if at all, it needs to be open. According to the future use of, for me, particularly Kennett Street, that's what I'm interested in, but there are other potentials. I don't know. Glenn?
Yeah, just to enhance this, not just adding words as you suggest, but you could actually also include an illustration showing the design elements we're talking about here. Just again, to be illustrative, it would be the plan, say it would have to be this, but this is the vision, could include a curbless block. It could have a different pavement, pretty much rougher pavement. It could have other features there, something that the urban designers, park and planner are more capable of doing. But that might lend to this as well. There are a couple other shared streets in the plan, and they're both, the other ones are sort of similar to this one in terms of the idea is that they would be and heavily downplay motor vehicle passage going through. We would allow it, but at a very, very slow speed, but to the benefit of bikers and pedestrians and just street activity, particularly Ellsworth between Fenton and Veterans Plaza and Bonifant Street between Ramsey and George Avenues. So I think adding an illustration, I think, would be, in addition to the words.
Yeah, I think an illustration would be good. Again, I think the street has to be closed, completely at certain times. To me, that's the essential thing. It has to be actively managed. It has to be closed completely at certain times.
It needs to be accessible for emergency vehicles, though, because there at certain times of the day, particularly if you're coming from the firehouse on Georgia Avenue, the quickest way to get to the Micah Apartments and to the Spring Garden Apartments is using Blair Mill Road. the little section of East West Highway and this section of Newell Street, rather than going up to the intersection at Burlington and 13th Street and East West Highway. Particularly that intersection is going to get more and more congested over time with East West Highways lanes being reduced from 4 to 2 lanes. There are going to be times where the quickest access is that way, and they need to physically be able to get there. So,
but how are we handling that now? I mean, right now, you're driving around.
It's potentially an issue, but it would save at least a minute.
Casey or Mitty.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that we feel that we need to be able to open and close the street as appropriate, even before the South Silver Spring Park issue is sorted out. Just to be clear, we want to continue programming this area. We're not going to stop doing that, but it's causing us some significant problems, as well as I think some unnecessary friction with the adjoining apartment building when we have it closed down 24/7 just indefinitely. And we don't think that's necessary in order to continue programming it very regularly, very heavily, taking advantage of the opportunity that's there. So we just want to make sure we have some flexibility to go back and forth. As Glenn says, there will be some issues operationally with East West Highway and what that means. So we just want to be able to have some flexibility here, but we remain committed to continuing to provide this as a very actively used, heavily programmed space into the indefinite future. And I think the wharf is a good illustration. It provides the opportunity. You can go back and forth. Even when it's open, it does not invite high-speed traffic or people to drive carelessly through there without heed of the heavily pedestrian-oriented activity in that area, but it does not absolutely close it off to all vehicle traffic at all times.
Well, who manages it? I mean, does the Silver Spring Urban District include this inside its boundary?
Well, I think that, we'll continue to work with DOT, but this also raises an important point that even with abandonment, it wouldn't come to the Parks Department, because if you abandon the right-of-way, the law says land that's dedicated for transportation use, like a road, goes back to the abutting property owners. So even if you were to make the decision it's no longer needed for a road, that actually would not accomplish the goal of getting it into under the Parks Department's ownership. We think that it's working to be able to we're working very cooperatively and collaboratively with DOT. We'll continue to do that. We are programming it, I think, pretty heavily. We'll work with the urban district and with Jacob and everybody from the county government. But I don't think you need to put you don't need to put a fine point on it in the master plan. I guess that's where I'm going with that.
Okay, well, again, I think it's important for us to have language here that I like the idea of an illustration. I like some language about removing curbs, connecting Acorn with the street space, with the pop space, and active management. I think there's some open question here as to who comes out to close it. Is it only for a parks program? I don't think that's enough. Is it is it Friday from 4 o'clock until Monday at 6 a.m.? Who does that? Is it every day after school?
Okay, could I suggest that we work on this language online, and I think it's two parts. One is what language is in the plan, and another part is we could formalize some kind of understanding with the county about some of these operational questions, which might not belong in the plan, but it might still provide you some assurance that it's going to operate in the way that you have in mind.
Okay, great. My favorite thing. We'll work together on some language.
Awesome.
All right. All
Okay.
right.
So we have one last park facility space to talk about before we turn to transportation, which is the King Street Park. This is the community garden conversation we had when the committee was reviewing the South Silver Spring District. There was a recommendation in the plan to support retaining this open space. You can see here it says retain the King Street Park.
Okay, so I just had a quick question about this. So I understand that this is privately owned and leased to, you shared leased to parks at a de minimis cost. Who owns it and why do they?
The owner of the connecting property, the adjacent property, owns this land. And this private property owner leases it to MNC PPC on an annual basis. The recommendation from council staff is simply to really change sort of the way this is simply worded, which is to support the continued use of the community garden until the property redevelops.
Okay.
And just leave it at that. That's continuing to support it the way it works today, but not presuming that anything happens as a part of that redevelopment.
So the adjacent property owns it. They lease it to the county so that it has, no, Tara's shaking her head.
Just for details, it's all one property. It's a portion of one property.
It's a portion of a property.
Yes.
The owner leases it so that it has a
matter.
specific use, and there's a de minimis charge. It's made available under the aegis of parks, but it's frankly provided to private residents who use that land for free. Okay, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate the council staff recommendation here. I think it's important that we not discourage, and I don't think it was the intention at all. And so I think the language reflects the goal here and the need not to discourage a property owner waiting to redevelop from providing a community benefit before they have an opportunity to redevelop. But we don't want to preclude the redevelopment because then nobody is going to provide community benefits unless they're forced to, because they're going to be afraid that it is going to, hinder future plans. So I think this strikes that balance of what it seemed to me was the intention of the plan, which makes sense. This is a benefit that people are utilizing, which is great, without punishing good behavior, so to speak. This is, we want property owners who aren't yet redeveloping to say, hey, in the meantime, we want to get rid of this parking lot, but why don't you use it for a farm market, or why don't you use it to get food trucks and have this as a public space, not necessarily for the private benefit of our tenants. So to me, I think council staff helped to address that, and I think that this makes sense personally.
Yes, go ahead, Christina.
I just want to add that, yes, we're going to be working with council staff. We're going to revise the language so to avoid any, sort of misunderstanding on that language, and the developer can develop its site as it's right to be developed. So we'll come back with that language.
Okay. Well, my last comment here, I don't know if I've ever seen this. I didn't know it was there. There's only really a couple dozen people, I think, who get to use this. So it's no surprise that it is not widely known. And we appreciate the property owner making it available to those individuals. And, we'll see what happens in the future. Okay.
Great. Well, that pretty much covers it. The plan wraps up by having presented all of these park places and providing them in the plan with all the detail that you've seen and more in the plan as well. So with that, unless there's any more comment on any of the specifics, I think we can turn it over to transportation.
Hey, thank you very much, Pam. Covering the transportation elements of the plan is also the fiscal impact statement. First, I want to say that the comments we received on the plan regarding transportation from the executive and from the general public and the ones you'll hear from me, we're generally very supportive of the plan. We think the plan was excellently done. A lot of really good aspects to this, and so nothing from this point on should let you think that this is not a good plan. It is a really good plan. But in the interest of time, what the packet identifies are those places where there's some disagreement with what's in the plan. So we deal with those. First of all, the fiscal impact statement analysis is required by the executive on every plan. And the reason why this is required is because there needs to be not just an aspirational aspect to master plans, but also an affordable aspect to master plans to make sure that at least the council knows whether or not what is being proposed in the plan is something that the county can actually afford to build over time. The fiscal impact of capital cost of this plan, DOT and OMB has calculated to be $707 million, which is extraordinarily high. You'll see the table at the bottom of page 2, which compares this with other plans adopted in the last 6 years, and you see there it's considerably higher. In one respect, this $707 million is an overestimate because it includes the entire cost of a metro station at Jessup Blair Park, where the impact statement, though, also suggests that if that were done, at least half of the money would come from the federal and state government, if that could ever be approvable. And when you did the Shady Grove plan, you recall that there was a station included in the fiscal impact statement and in the plan at Montgomery College, Rockville. That one was $320 million, and the cost was split 50-50, so the county cost would only be $160 million. That wasn't done here. So the $250 million cost estimate from DOT for this metro station only should have counted half of that. So the $707 million then immediately is reduced by $125 million down to $582 million. However, in another respect, the impact statement is underestimated because it does not include lots of things. It does not include any land acquisition costs. It does not include any utility relocation costs, which would be considerable, particularly on the bikeway improvements that are being talked about in the plan. It does not include the cost of whether construction or land or utility relocation for the outer green loop or for the green loop connectors. It doesn't include anything for the world-class entry into the metro stations, the area, which is at this point just a concept, and then several other aspects as well. Bottom line is, though, that even with not counting half the cost of that metro station, the plan is in my mind, unaffordable over time for the county. And so the effort that I've tried to do here is try to sift out the less important elements of the plan that cost money.
Hey, can I just make one brief comment here, Glenn, which is that usually in a master plan, the transportation infrastructure that we identify is associated with what we think it takes to make the transportation numbers work, right? And I think this one's a little different. I don't think anyone thinks that a new metro station is necessary for transportation to work in this plan. It's more about transportation infrastructure that would be an enhancement over a baseline than are part of a baseline, I think. So
yeah, I don't disagree with that. But whatever was in the plan is something that's going to cost money.
No, I hear you. Like, I share some of your perspective here. We'll get into some of these details, but
sure.
We have to have some constraints. But okay. But this one is a little different in that the transportation analysis is quite different, right? We don't have to. Isn't it? Aren't there different requirements for transportation here?
Well, you've changed the rules with regards to the growth and infrastructure policy, and so what counts as being tolerable is different now. For example, within the Silver Spring CBD, there are no restrictions on congestion. Congestion can rise as high as it does, and it won't stop anything. So there's really no need to actually make intersection improvements or to add a road or this sort of thing. If your point, which you've made in the growth and infrastructure policy, is congestion is not a serious consideration anymore in the CBD. Now it is outside, but not in the CBD itself. However,
I think we're saying it might be a consideration, but we're not going to widen a street in order to do it. We would address it in a more operational sense. Okay.
And then, but the bikeway and pedestrian tests, if you will, are tighter than they were, and so there's probably more requirements there. But nevertheless, I just don't want to get too hung up with that. I was just basically laying the groundwork for why I'm recommending some reduction in some of the costs that are being implications from this plan. The first issue I'll talk about is on page 3 is the Jessup Blair Metro Station. so my comments on here are the same ones I did make back when we talked about the Shady Grove plan and the station at Montgomery College, except more so in this case. There's really very little existing or even planned density around that station, station. It really doesn't justify a metro station at all. It's actually very close to the Tacoma station. It's within a walkshed of the Tacoma station. It's not something which itself cries out for a demand here. And it's a very expensive project. So, and DOT basically saying the same thing. So my recommendation is basically just not even refer to this as a possibility in the plan.
Does anyone want to make a case for this? All right. I mean, I can't really argue with you there. I don't.
Well, if I could just jump in here, two things. First is the idea would be if the land use at some point on the DC side in particular justifies it. Secondly, it's not necessarily, well, the plan says Metro Rail. I think there is a planned streetcar up Georgia Avenue in DC. Right now, the terminus is planned for Tacoma Park because DC has always thought we don't want to operate an interjurisdictional streetcar service because we get wrapped up in a WMATA type arrangement, which they don't want. But we've always felt that if there is a streetcar up Georgia, it would be great to terminate it on Eastern Avenue, perhaps at the Blairs, at which point maybe there would be a transit stop justified here. So if you don't like the Metro Rail stuff, why don't you just say that a transit stop at the park could be justified if there is an appropriate service, whether it's rail or bus rapid transit or streetcar or whatever, and just
Sure.
do that.
Happy to have a transit stop, a more intensified transit stop at the park. I think that'd be a great idea. But to your point, we're obviously not changing much of the land use around this area. In fact, we're putting an historic designation over, 17 acres of land right next to this, and so on. So, okay, I could be okay with saying I'm fine with calling out the opportunity for a transit stop, particularly on that DC interjurisdictional line. That seems quite relevant. Andrew.
Yeah. Sorry, before the chair noted that, I was going to say something along the lines of talking about transit access to that particular area, number one, and number two, referencing greater connectivity, interjurisdictional connectivity and mobility, through high quality transit. I mean, I think if we reflect that, if and when the opportunity arises, I think that would be a significant benefit, and I think makes a lot of sense, and it's more reflective with the land use and other designation decisions that we're making in the plan. I mean, as noted, the historic preservation decision does not purport itself well to the type of density around transit that we would traditionally want.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What I was going to add was that several years ago, when the streetcar plan was being designed, one of the things I suggested was it's just what.
I thought that's in the plan. I thought we put that in.
Was actually to extend up Georgia Avenue past Eastern Avenue up to Bonifant Street and tie in with the Purple Line. But I think it's premature to do that now. I mean, if this is the kind of thing where if in fact the streetcar plan gets closer to being actualized in DC up that direction, we should have active talks with, and I'm talking years from now probably because the Purple Line is still not even built, but years from now that there will be these conversations with DC and get some kind of agreement where the line might go. And if it continues up Georgia Avenue to Bonifant Street and ties in there, then that sort of calls out for maybe a local master plan amendment for that, sort of southern Georgia Avenue area where you could decide where stops ought to be on a streetcar with Jessup Lake Park. Maybe there's another one at Sligo Avenue. But it also means the right-of-way at Georgia Avenue would change. So it's not insignificant. It could have real impacts, but it could be a really cool transportation connection that's made that way. And that would make a lot more sense, frankly, than having a metro station. So
a streetcar station is desired.
Yeah. So that my suggestion is just maybe make
Thanks, Atara. At least you recognize that one.
Yeah, have language in the plan which says that potentially there could be a streetcar line and there could be a subsequent master plan amendment to address that.
Sounds good.
I'm fine with that as well. Thanks.
So you're going to come up with language with planning staff and come back to the committee? Is that what we agreed on?
Will do.
Great.
Okay, the next item is the non-auto driver mode share, NADMS. Again, for the uninitiated, this is the percentage of either residents or employees going to or from work by means other than driving a car. The prior Silver Spring plan, the prior Silver Spring plan from about 20 years ago has the mode shares being the goal being 46% for employees coming to work in Silver Spring. We're actually a good bit higher than that. Even prior to COVID, that percentage was closer to 54%. Modeling done by the planning staff shows that actually it could be between 60 and 61% with the improvements in the plan. And so the plan is recommending 60% as the non-auto driver mode share as an aggregate between residents and employees. In other words, residents living in Silver Spring, commuting to work, and then employees who are working in Silver Spring, commuting from elsewhere into Silver Spring. The Coalition for Smarter Growth believes it should be a higher goal than that, and they're suggesting 70%. I agree with them. I think there's several reasons why we can look towards a higher goal than 60. One is that, again, it's because this is an aggregate non-auto driver mode share goal. Typically in places like Bethesda, White Flint, Wheaton, Silver Spring, folks who live in the CBD have a much higher propensity to take transit or means other than driving to go to work than the employees coming in to Silver Spring from elsewhere. Because we're coming from elsewhere, their transit service is very good to some places and not so good in others. So it depends on a lot of people still having to drive in. And that's not so much the case for people who live in Silver Spring. And so for just changing the definition of what this mode share is, I think you could expect a higher percentage. Secondly, most of this analysis is done based on pre-COVID information. And what's happened since then? Telecommuting. Telecommuting probably isn't going to be as extensive as it was in the last 2 years, but we think, I think most of us believe it's going to be here to stay, even if it's a matter of telecommuting on average 2 days a week. That still considerably reduces the number of people who are driving to work in Silver Spring. Thirdly, there's a lot of additional housing proposed in this plan within the CBD. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a higher propensity for people to take transit if they're living in and around a metro station than if they're working there and coming from elsewhere. So for all those reasons, I think the goal ought to be raised to at least 65%. I think 70% is more than aspirational. I think it's actually doable. So
Okay.
I agree with them. I think 70% is where we should be.
Thumbs up on that, colleagues? Yep. All right.
Okay. On page 4.
Hannah.
Sorry.
Hannah.
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to share, just for a point of clarification, first of all, that we did run the recommendation of going to 70% by our commuter services team that actually implements the plans and works with the developers, and they did express concerns about setting that as the standard goal. They pointed out to me that for any new development, they're required to provide 5% over the standard. So that would actually, in effect, put new developers at 75%, not 70.
Why is that? Is that in the TDM law or something? Why?
That is in so it is in a red policy area of the county code. For a development that is over 40,000 square feet, it requires a commitment by the owner to do a base that is 5% higher than the district's goal. So the concern would be that, in effect, some developments would be required to hit 75%. The team also wanted me to highlight the fact that the director of DOT does have the discretion of increasing or decreasing the goal for particular developments by 5%. So if we felt that 70% is achievable and the rate, let's say, was set at 65%, that we do have the discretion to request certain developers to increase to 70%, but having the 70% across the board as the goal, our team is concerned about the ability of developers to reach that as a general approach.
So you would think 65% would be more attainable? Or what's your
I mean,
recommendation?
it is at your discretion. Our team is happy with the 60%.
60%. Okay, Glenn, and then Catherine Mansorini.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to have my hand up.
Oh,
Sorry.
Catherine?
Yeah, sure. So Katie Mancarini, working on the transportation section of this plan. I just want to say that we're encouraged by Smart Growth trying to push for more higher than what our model says. I want to reemphasize that this is a goal. I mean, and I don't want to downplay how important the NADMS goal is, but there aren't consequences for not meeting it. There's not like a punishment. There's not like a fine. We want them to keep
I thought there
pushing
was,
for it.
Katie. I thought that the TDM legislation hooked a lot of requirements into development now based on the NADMS.
So
goal
they'll
of the
need
plan
to
area.
they'll need to continue working towards that goal, but it's not as if they get like fined or they won't be able to develop or they can't do. I mean, we should always be pushing for reducing the single occupancy vehicle. So setting that goal higher is not, I think, I mean, if you want to go to 65, that's fine. But I think if we're really going to push this, we're only going to get this in Silver Spring. This is the place to be bold and to really push for that kind of change and emphasize it.
Maybe Hannah could explain the actual implications with the TDM laws, because some things have changed. Maybe you could explain that, Hannah.
Yeah, I will do my best. And I don't know, let me see. I know Andrew Bossi is here with me. Andrew, if you want to add anything, please feel free to jump in.
We're descending into a new layer of transportation complexity. Okay.
Yeah, I think Katie is correct in that the developers do have time to pursue these goals. So under the new legislation, they have 6 years to achieve their goals. And so our department works with them year by year to evaluate how they are doing at achieving their goals and to try to adjust their programs in order to reach their goals. Once they get to the 6-year mark, we do a reevaluation, and if they are unable to meet the goals, then additional funding may be required for the project. So while I would not call it a fee or a fine, there is a financial aspect, and developers do push back on the NADMS. And Andrew, do you want to add to anything on that? So it's never intended to be punitive, and we are always trying to work with developers to hit the goals. But there are concerns about approvals of plans. We do have most of our concerns that we've had recently on goals that are a bit higher than developers feel that they can achieve do ultimately result in concerns over timing of developers moving forward with the project. So we feel that what was proposed in the plan was reasonable.
Okay.
Like I said, we do have the discretion of the increase of 5 or decrease of 5% in either direction.
Okay.
Andrew, anything else?
Andrew, do you want to add anything, or we'll go to Andrew Friedson after, if Andrew Bossi has nothing to add? No.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Andrew Friedson.
Yeah, so I mean, I was comfortable moving to 70 with that being a staff recommendation and thinking that it's reasonable. I'm wondering, I mean, you raised an important point here of going 5% more, going from 60% and maybe being able to reach 70% as a goal to 75%. I mean, that is a little bit different, and I'm glad that you raised that point. Could we hear from planning at all? Because we've heard a couple different things from planning. On the one hand, the recommendation was 60. We're talking about not going to 65, but going to 70, because this is the hub of transit in the county. I mean, literally and figuratively, this is the place that has by far the greatest transit access of any place in the county. And we're doing a master plan that's intended to build upon and improve on that strength. And so, you know, to the point made earlier by Katie, if we're not going to do it here, we won't do it anywhere. On the other hand, it wasn't the recommendation originally, perhaps because of some of these concerns of what is realistic. So could we just hear from planning of the rationale for 60%? And then if 70% is reasonable, or if 65% as a compromise with some language of, anyway, let's hear from planning.
Well, while we're waiting for Katie, I just had a suggestion here. First of all, I think that while it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison, because it depends on how you measure NADMS, if it's just work trips or what, there's a blended rate now, I think, that we're going to. So I'm not going to go out on a limb and say it's exactly comparable, but my understanding is that we've hit these upper 60s numbers in Friendship Heights, which is actually the peak NADMS performance of any transportation planning area in the county. So I think it is achievable. What I was going to suggest, though, is that one of the problems is when you lock something like this into the master plan, on the one hand, if you're too low, you fail to push hard enough, and if you're too high, you can cause some problems with getting compliance or achieving the goals. So one way to do this in the plan would be to put in whatever the number is, like 65% as the plan, baseline, but then give planning the opportunity, either as part of its LATR guidelines or some similar process or through the GIP, to boost the NADMS goal for the planning area in subsequent exercises before we do another master plan in 20 years.
All right, so it's Katie again. I hear what you're saying, and I think that could be another way to do it. I know that we generally want to stick to like what is in the plan right now, and we don't want to necessarily give other policies work to do when with it. But I think your point is valid. In terms of like what we talked about with the planning board, when we were looking at this, we didn't want to be too ambitious, but I think that if we're reaching with the model 60 to 61%, and models aren't perfect, it does say that we need to go higher. So, I mean, I think we can definitely make an argument for 65%. I still feel pretty comfortable with 70%. But if that's where everyone else's comfort level is, if that's the feedback we're getting from the developers, I think that 65 would still be a pretty ambitious and still, a goal you could hang your hat on. I think that would still be worth it.
Before we go to staff, could you respond to would it be appropriate if we included language to 65%, which is 5% above what planning did, and then included language to encourage the director and planning to go beyond that where appropriate, so that it could be more of a, use the tools that already exist in other policies to go beyond, to go beyond that where it is applicable and appropriate, so that we're not stopping a development from happening. We want the housing to happen. We want the office buildings to be built. That helps to reach the goal in and of itself. So if we set a goal that's too high, that prohibits it, it prevents the NADMS from being reached. There is a little bit of a back and forth here to find that right balance. Is that language, is there a there to find language that would address that?
Yeah, I think so, and I would be interested to hear what Dr. Orland says. But I mean, to Hannah's point, or Ms. Henn's point, so for those developments that are 40,000 square feet or larger, so on the larger side, they have to go 5% above. So I think we're kind of already getting into that territory. That said, I think it's fine if in the plan we want to say like there are projects, perhaps given their proximity to Metro or some of the other rapid transit stations that are planned in the area, that maybe they should go beyond the goal. I think that's fine, because then if the TDM legislation or something else changes, that intent is still there and still specific to this area. So that would be I think what you're proposing makes sense, but I'm certainly, I defer also to our council staff who's been at this a lot longer than I have. So I'd be curious to have Dr. Orland's insights.
Yeah, I'd be a little uncomfortable actually granting the planning board that authority. The law allows DOT as the administrator of the TDM program to be the one that actually decides whether or not you can go 5% higher or not. And even there, there's that restriction. It's just 5%. Another way of maybe dealing with this is maybe rather than having, if you're concerned about what effect this will have, particularly on commercial developments, rather than having an aggregate goal, go back to the idea of having goals separately for residential and commercial, and maybe have residential be 70% and have commercial be 60%. And that way you'd end up probably in the upper 60s in terms of what the ultimate goal would be. It wouldn't be quite as aggressive as going to 70% overall. But it depends where the concern really is. If the concern is with commercial development not being able to reach that goal, and I could see that given that it's the there's only so much you can get from coming from other parts of the county. Remember also though that Silver Spring, in addition to having all that bus service, is going to have the purple line serving it from both directions, east and west. Bethesda only has it coming from the east. So just doubling down on what Frieson's saying, that this particular point in the county will have the best transit access. It has now and will have the best transit access of anywhere else in the county.
Yeah, let's hear from Hannah and from Gwen. I mean, I will say there are a number of climate-oriented provisions in this plan. And I think this is probably one of the more important ones. I think there's some stuff around, well, I'll just say other things, environmental requirements that might have less impact than reducing the amount of driving into the CBD. So, this one sort of ranks a little higher for me on the scale. Gwen. Oh, Hannah, you took your hand down.
I thought
so,
I
lost
did
you.
because yes. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. I did just want to just clarify just one last time that actually setting it at 65% for developments over 40,000 square feet, that would be requiring them to hit the 70%. So because the developments in the red policy area are required to do 5% above, setting it at 65% would require 70% for those developments. And if you did move forward with the 70%, I just want to make sure everyone's clear that would actually require 75% of those developments without special permission from the DOT director.
All right, well, without special permission from DOT.
Yeah.
Gwen?
Yeah, I did want to just sort of emphasize that one of the outcomes of COVID has also been a reduction in the number of people commuting by transit. I don't know that we are actually, even in downtown DC, hitting, well, I was just trying to quickly look. I think they're hitting maybe 55% non-auto driver mode share. I mean, 60 is meaning that larger projects have to go to 65 is really quite ambitious.
Okay.
And there is a ramification, which is, as Hannah was describing, because I was very involved with the revisions to the TDM law, is that if you, after 6 years, do not meet those goals, the property owner has to invest more money to try to encourage their residents or office workers. So there is an actual financial ramification to not meeting the goal. It's not just a pie in the sky kind of thing. There is, through the new TDM law, we really did tie money into it.
So,
So I would.
So it's 65% when new development is at 70. I've never heard of an NADMS goal that high, frankly. That's pretty high.
Yep.
It's pretty impressive. It can be attained, but there is some consequence in the TDM law that we passed. So, so it sounds like 65 might be more consensus point there. Glenn?
As I was saying earlier, 65% I think is doable. 70% would be more of a reach. I think it's doable, but 65% would be safer for sure.
And we have DOT suggesting they liked 60. They think 65 is better than 70. All right. Any other comments here? We all thumbs up on 60? Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'll go along with it. I mean, I'm fine with 70. I think the points that were made by Katie about that it's a goal and the consequences are way down the road, and I would have been fine with 70, but if it's consensus at 65 with the 5%, for the larger ones up to 70, that's fine with me as well.
All right. Okay. Consensus is 65.
You could make a provision that it could go up under the GIP or another policy. I know Glenn is allergic to giving us authority to do this, but really it would be under the council's direction to say either you could delegate the authority to us, or you could just say other policies may specify our number. And that way you don't have to wait until the end of the master plan, because we had this problem with the GIP where you have some master plans that specify a number, and if they do, it becomes extremely difficult, sometimes impossible, to change that with the GIP or any other policy change without opening up the master plan. So you could, if you want to go 65, you could just say it's 65 until another policy or regulation sets a higher standard. And then
I think that makes sense.
Could similar to what I was saying earlier, could we say something along the lines of, through policy or the discretion provided to the director, and then just kind of note that there are opportunities to go higher, after this plan is approved?
Which director?
The director of transportation, who the council has already ceded the authority to provide higher. So I think if we just say that, it reflects what is currently the reality. We always have the discretion in other policies to go higher. It signals our intention, but it also doesn't set an unrealistic expectation at 75%, which may be a hindrance to redevelopment for some of the larger projects that we want in order to actually hit this goal.
Right.
Hannah?
Just one more point of clarification for your consideration as you reach a decision is that the growth and infrastructure policy does allow separate goals for the downtown versus the adjacent communities. And so I just want to make sure that you're aware that option is on the table under the GIP.
Yeah, my understanding was that this NADMS goal would be just for the Silver Spring CBD and not for the adjacent communities.
Right. Okay, so we have the consensus is 65 with reference to other policies that could make it higher.
Or lower.
Or lower, I suppose.
I think specifically, as Mr. Anderson said, the growth infrastructure policy would be the vehicle for that, because that's something that would take comments from everyone and the council would make the final decision.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. The next on page 4, connecting across the rail. There are 5 locations today where pedestrians, bikers, and cars, pedestrian bikers can go from one side of the railroad tracks to the others. At Spring Street, at Colesville Road, and Georgia Avenue and Burlington Avenue. And then at Jessup Blair Park, there's the PHED bridge, basically. The plan calls for some worthwhile and not too costly improvements at the first 4 of those crossings. At the Jessup Blair Bridge, the plan is recommending widening the bridge, either replacing or widening the bridge to allow for biking across the bridge. The bridge is owned by Montgomery College. Bikers are allowed to walk their bikes across, but not ride it across.
Is there a reason for that, by the way? Is it just simply the school's policy, or is there some standard here that would?
I talked to college staff about it. They're more concerned about basically the number of students walking across and having bikers in the same width bridge could be a problem. But bikers,
as an occasional user of the bridge, I would say when there's not a lot of people on it, it seems fine to ride your bike on it. When there's people on it, you would be courteous and you would want to dismount, you know?
I totally disagree. I totally agree with you. Anyway, DOT is recommending, estimating the cost of widening the bridge to being $16.3 million. I don't recommend that. I think the bridge is only 20 years old. It's in pretty good shape. Bikers can walk their bikes across, and it provides a good bike PHED connection without having to undergo that expense. Again, I'm trying to look for ways.
Yeah, I understand.
To reduce the cost.
I mean, I can appreciate the point that a bigger, wider bridge would be better. But as a steward of public dollars, I find it hard to recommend that we tear down a bridge that is not perfect, but it's functioning. Katie?
Yeah, I'm so glad that Dr. Orland brought this up, because that was not the intent of the language. And so anytime something's unclear, it's so helpful to have this discussion. So what we're trying to say here, absolutely agree. We do not need to just tear down a perfectly good bridge that's recently built. What we're looking for is we want to set a precedent that moving forward, new bridges or when bridges have the maintenance needs such that you do need to reconstruct them, we want to design them in such a way that they really meet the context in which they are, which is an urban area that is used that we want to be predominantly by pedestrians and cyclists. So it's more of like a policy statement and encouraging that that's what we want to see. And we picked on this one because it's an example of where it doesn't quite meet what we want right now. So we'd be happy with your blessing and your agreement to massage that language so it's more clear that we're not trying to take down a perfectly good bridge. It's that we want to set a new design standard for future projects.
Okay.
You can make that as a general comment as opposed to specifically this bridge.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right. Great.
Okay. The other part of the plan calls for 2 new crossings. One between the end of Silver Spring Avenue, going across the tracks to East West Highway, between the Bennington and the Silverton high rises. Cost of that's $45 million. And then the other is from the west end of Cameron Street, north of Colesville Road, over and through to and through the Falklands development. And the estimated cost of that is a little over $20 million. Both connections would occur partially on private property. DOT suggests adding some conditions and putting in the plan the following 3 points. That define the right-of-way or easement requirements in the event of a publicly built connection, such as ensuring unfettered public access and limiting physical, visual, and noise encroachment. This is the middle of page 4. Secondly, allow the connections to be made in private developments, but under defined requirements such as hours of access, ease of navigation and convenience, ADA accessibility, visibility, and the obviousness of the route, wayfinding, etc. And finally, define the stubs that might be built by a developer at the point where the future bridge tunnel might be provided. I think if we include these comments in the plan, these, although expensive, would be very useful to have, particularly the first of those 2, the one connecting the end of Silver Spring Avenue over to East West Highway, and the other one as well, eventually, to break up these huge, effectively super blocks. You just can't get here from there if you're in a bike or pedestrian. From one side of the tracks to the other, between Colesville Road and East West Highway, so for example. So with those additional bullets, I recommend approval of those things in the plan.
Yeah, this is one we first identified in the Silver Spring placemaking plan that I asked for planning to take on, which yielded the bike network that's already up and under construction, and we came up with the idea of a crossing. I think uniting these 2 sides of the Silver Spring is really important, and I think it's a disadvantage for both. All those folks who live on South Silver Spring side, it's not super convenient to get to the north, and I think it would create a much more successful small business environment to have a really efficient connection. Atara.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, in case it wasn't clear from the recommendations, that the second bridge connection that's proposed to connect up at downtown north across the tracks is in the plan. It is recommended that only be implemented if that northern Falklands parcel redevelops. That the way the existing development is does not really merit that kind of investment, but that if that really becomes a mixed-use development with the grocery store and whatever else was approved, whatever else JBG or any other owner of that property in the future decides to do, particularly looking at what's approved already under that site plan, then it sort of merits that kind of connection. That's how the recommendation is, and I just want to make that clear as we're going through these now.
So where would it come out, on the north side?
So I think we actually said it would come out at Apple Avenue, is what I thought, but I'm going to look at the map that's next to me. Yes, it sort of comes out at Apple, which is then connects to Second. That's like that small block that is north to the south of the, in between Elizabeth Square development and the courthouse. That's where it would land.
All right. Well, you know, not nearly as useful, I think, as the other one we're talking about. But
agreed.
You know, so something to have on a list.
I think exactly as the plan words it. While of course the other one we're really pushing as a key recommendation, something that would really tremendously contribute to the connectivity of Silver Spring. I just sort of wanted to highlight that this one is sort of proposed as a something that should, if that parcel is redeveloped, something that should be seriously considered.
Yeah. Okay. Glenn, so Glenn, you're suggesting to remove it or just simply to, no, okay, fine.
Them both in the plan. I'm just saying priority wise, what Atara said is right. That the one connecting the end of Silver Spring Avenue over to East West Highway is the.
I mean, partly the reason I say I'm not, you know, it's less useful is I think if you were going to most of Silver Spring from the Falklands, it would still be quite direct to take East West Highway to Colesville and then up, you know, like it would only be if you were going to that one quadrant that you would rather take a bridge across. So I think.
You're right.
So that's why it's just not quite the same, but it's worth considering. Okay.
Any other comments from the committee? Okay. Moving on then, bottom page 4, Colesville Road north of downtown. We've had a lot of comments on this. The you recall that DOT for a couple of years now has been working on the US 29 reliability and plan, and what they're calling for in this section of Colesville Road is to take the existing 6 lanes, which run 4 lanes southbound in the morning, 2 lanes northbound in the morning, and they reverse in the evening, 2 lanes southbound in the morning and 4 lanes northbound in the evening, to basically take one of the 4 lanes in the peak direction and have that be a dedicated bus lane. But it does not require, in their case, widening the right-of-way at all. The right-of-way today varies between 85 and 100 feet. And of course, that includes sidewalks and some area just beyond the sidewalks to the edge of the right-of-way. The concern raised by the community is that the plan shows a couple different scenarios for 120-foot wide right-of-way, which includes a fairly wide green buffer between the roadway and what would be a 12-foot wide sidewalk. Current sidewalks are only 5 feet on both sides. And so we have a wider sidewalk as well as the wider buffer. And they're talking about how the fact that this encroaches upon on their properties, on what they consider to be their properties, and would require taking out a lot of fences, some retaining walls, and that sort of thing. It also, the plan calls for 2 BRT lanes of those 6 lanes. So instead of being in the DOT case where you're talking about 3 lanes south, going from 4 lanes to 3 lanes for generally used traffic in the peak direction with a 1-lane BRT, it would be going from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes with the 2 BRT lanes, one in each direction at all times, or at least during the both peaks. My recommendation here is basically go with what DOT is saying, with the exception of widening the right-of-way a bit more than 80 feet, at least 85 feet, because the lanes that are on Colesville Road now, they're all 10-foot wide lanes, which is marginally sufficient for general vehicle traffic, particularly if you don't want them going too fast. But for buses, for the bus lanes, it really ought to be 12 feet because they're a wider girth. And so going to an 85-foot right-of-way would provide the extra least the extra 4 feet, and one extra foot for good measure, for the right of way. It would mean retaining the current 5-foot wide sidewalks, at least the widths along there. It's been pointed out by members of the community, there are other ways that bikers can actually come into downtown other than being on Colesville Road itself. And it would obviously be something which would not entail very much cost at all compared to the cost of rebuilding the right of way, relocating utilities, and that sort of thing. So that's my recommendation: is show the right of way as 6 lanes, as described by DOT, but with an 85-foot, a minimum 85-foot right of way.
All right. Well, I would certainly like to hear planning's comments here, and specifically in response to the letter. But Councilmember Dumando.
Yeah, I can listen to planning and then I can chime in after that. That's fine.
Okay, so let's hear from planning.
Okay, so this, again, it's Katie. I've got a lot to unpack with this one. I respect all of what you're saying, but I think there are some important points that we need to hit on first. So number one, this is a long range plan. So we are really taking a far view into the future. There's a lot of things that could change, and we really want to be as thoughtful as we can about our goals and what we're trying to achieve here. We're looking at Colesville Road as a transit corridor, and what we want to achieve here is both a safety goal, and also we want to improve the reliability and therefore the attractiveness of transit on this corridor. So what we applied was the current master planned right-of-way width for Colesville Road, both within the CBD and extended, because we want to make sure that the connection made sense. And that is not changing from previous plans. That was a master plan right-of-way that was originally as far back as the 2000 North and West Silver Spring plan and the 2000 CBD plan. Furthermore, that's been consistently confirmed by the master plan of highways and others. We are also,
you're saying that you didn't change the right of way width. You just want to use more of it. Is that essentially?
Yes, exactly. No, perfectly stated. And in fact, there are properties up and down the corridor that are dedicating the right of way as it's been master planned. It's true that we don't have all of it, but that is the master plans that we have been working with to this point.
So for example, the United Therapeutics, did they dedicate that?
They did. In fact, within the CBD, they have 60 feet dedicated from the center line that has been confirmed by SHA on previous regulatory items.
So development that has happened there has dedicated that.
Yes, and that is the expectation moving forward. If you have a preliminary plan coming in, that is what we're asking for.
No one's saying we're going to go out and build the sidewalk width and the road width absent development.
Correct.
But if the county were to envision the edge of Colesville as appropriate for development further up, then, you know, that width would be relied upon.
Mm-hmm. So, yes.
I should jump in just for a second. I did make it clear. My recommendation has to do with Colesville Road north of the downtown, not within the town. So it's within
yes, we're talking about like basically north of Spring, essentially.
Yes, but that also has that same
all the
master
way
plan
to where?
right away. Yes, all the way to Sligo Creek Parkway, I believe. I can pull it
Sligo
up.
Creek Parkway, which is
residential.
Well, it's a combination actually. It's businesses, there's churches, there's residential.
Right.
This is
well.
So with that said, so the next issues that I have a little bit is the planning board did review the US 29 mobility and reliability study, and there's a lot of really great things happening in that study. And however, we had some real concerns, and the recommendation from the planning board was to study it further. And in fact, money was allocated for that to do so. So we don't want to hang our hat completely on that study as it was presented to the planning board. So we still want to be aspirational. We still want to look at this with our priorities and our goals in mind. The other things that we have some concerns about too are the dynamic lane approach, just that whole operational. It is not great for pedestrians. It's not great for motorists. So what we were looking at were ways that possibly that could be reimagined, and we came up with 2 different alternatives that are meant to be long range and are meant to be studied further for both the geometry and the operations. This is not a end all be all, but we want to keep those opportunities open and demonstrate why the master plan right of way is as wide as it is, that it can be used for all of those goals that were identified both by the board now and previously.
Okay.
Question to, and both of you can answer it. You still have your hands up, which is fine, but I'm just letting you know. Is there some way to do something in the middle here? Like to have, we obviously need the 4 feet to accommodate the bus lanes. We can't, we're all for dedicated bus lanes. We have to do that. And it's the right thing to do. But the buffers for pedestrians are also very important for safety. This is a very important corridor. You have a lot of activity. Instead of the 120, could you do 100? And then my understanding of this is that for some of that route of that period, 100 is in the existing right of way. And so could you all respond to that? Is that possible? I'm sure anything is possible, but what do you?
Right. So I don't want to respond to a specific width because, we certainly would want to study that. And I just want to make sure I'm being specific about it. But if you're asking if there's an interim condition prior to the 120 feet, that's absolutely something that could be explored. And that's something that we could work on with DOT to put in there as something that maybe this is more feasible in the short term, given what we have. But I think it's really important that we still justify that full 120 width that we've been asking for consistently, because that's ultimately what we would want and where everything fits all of our criteria for like minimum widths, as you mentioned, for the bus lanes and for pedestrian experience and that kind of thing. The land uses that are out there today may be different. And so we want to make sure that we're still capturing what we want out of our larger network goals.
Okay. Lynn, do you have something?
Well, the 85 to 100 feet, there's only actually one place where it's 100 feet wide. Mostly it's between 85 and 90 feet is what the width is. So it would mean encroaching on at least what people believe to be their front yards. And in a lot of cases, there are retaining walls, there's trees, there's other aspects. And yes, there are churches along there, but primarily it's residential, and there is the one restaurant. I think would have a very large impact to go to that width. I think 100 feet might be too much, frankly. Maybe at the most, let's say at most 100 feet, but certainly not as an interim to 120 feet. I think 120 feet is a bridge too far, given what I know was out there. Again, we're only talking about from Spring Street to Sligo Creek Park.
Right. Okay. Well, let me hear.
The other aspect to it is, and it's not part of the cross section itself in terms of the width, it has to do with the use of the lanes. I remember seeing studies over the years that when you take away that many lanes from Colesville Road, the backups go back for miles and miles and miles. And we'll see what the result of the study is that DOT is doing right now, looking at a median lane option as well as a managed lane option. But I can't imagine it would have any different result, especially even if we go with a higher non-auto driver mode share, because there's just so much. There's not that many alternatives for cars to come into Silver Spring. There are for pedestrians and for bikers, but for cars, not so much.
No, that's it.
As opposed to in Silver Spring itself, where by the time you get to Spring Street, it can fan out and use other roads. That's why taking away 2 lanes within the CBD is certainly plausible. Taking away 2 lanes for dedicated bus lanes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's an important point. I mean, we've all been on Colesville Road on 29 when it's backed up, and for those who are coming from the far eastern part of the county, obviously we want to increase the bus usage, which is why we need the dedicated lane for the bus. But that is a reality of something that I think we have to think about. But okay. All right. Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I'll start, I think, where Councilmember Joanna started. The consensus around dedicated lanes is a shift in the county, and I think it's a really important and positive shift that is broad consensus that dedicated lanes for bus rapid transit for high quality regional bus service is not a nice to have, it's a must have if you're going to actually have reliable bus transit that is a competitive alternative to cars. And we just talked about being ambitious on NADMS, and these things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're tied directly to one another. That said, so I support all of that. I'm very excited and just pleased that the county as a consensus is where we are on this important issue that has been debated for decades, frankly. I'm just wondering, this seems very specific. for a master plan that I'm not sure that I have seen in other master plans. I was just, perhaps wondering if the specific width of a right of way. I know in the Veers Mill master plan, for instance, we talked about lane widths and intersections, but I can't recall another scenario. And I'm still relatively new here, just wrapping up the first term, but I can't recall a scenario where we debated in the context of a master plan the foot width of right of way through a corridor. So if we could just share that, is that customary and I've just missed it previously, or is this more specific than we have previously gotten into for this type of dynamic?
It's in every plan. Every plan has right of way, what's called minimum rights of way for every length of major road, and not every residential street. But and the point of that is that if, and it was referred to earlier, if a development happens along the road, then the development's usually required by park and planning to dedicate that right of way. In fact, in a lot of ways, the right of way recommendation is even more important to the day-to-day planning work of the planning board than the number of lanes or the use of lanes.
Unless I'm missing it, maybe I can hear from planning, but I am only familiar with seeing this in the context of redevelopment, where the discussion has been dedication and redevelopment as the context of road improvements or pedestrian bike facilities, et cetera. I mean, I understand that it's in the plan, but I have never. This is the first time I have recalled us debating it. I mean, we discussed the lane widths in certain aspects in the turn lanes, for instance, in Veers Mill, the first Vision Zero plan that we did at the council, and frankly, the first plan at all that Councilmember Jawando and I did on this committee. But I don't know. Maybe
you're right. No,
maybe there's just always consensus, and this is the first time there hasn't been consensus. Is that?
It's usually the discussions, the things you talked about, but every plan does have rights of way width, and this is a case where the right of way width is an issue. It's been raised by the Woodside Park residents, and they're concerned because again, it would bring the road facilities, if you will, including the sidewalks, the wider sidewalk, and the green buffer between the sidewalk and the roadway, onto what they consider to be their private property. In fact, it is their private property in a lot of cases. The 120 feet that Katie mentioned was the prior and still proposed minimum right of way. It's not what the actual right of way is today. Again, the actual right of way varies between 85 and 100 feet.
But it is what we would expect if they're coming in for redevelopment. I completely understand what you're saying there. I mean, it is legally, this is it as a regulatory reviewer. That is the first thing I look for, and we've pushed for it with all of our other projects on the 29 corridor. And then just to echo what Dr. Orland said, yes, it is in every plan. You probably also looked at it, the Montgomery Hills plan. That was another corridor plan that we looked at. The difference there was that there had been a lot more vetting with the community and with SHA before the plan came, because it was more to confirm that corridor alignment. And I think something that's important to point out is that what you may see that's different from other plans is we really wanted to thoughtfully consider the master planned right-of-ways, the minimum master plan right-of-ways, and develop these cross-sections, right? So we see all the time, we see these tables that say this is how much right-of-way we need, but they're not being justified how that's actually going to make sense. And so we really wanted to go through this exercise to determine how much space do we really need out there to get the safety and the reliability transit goals that we have, make sure that that makes sense. If it looked like 120 feet was just bogus, too wide, then sure, we would have then recommended a narrower minimum right-of-way, but we're confirming what was done before. And then furthermore, this part being outside of the master plan CBD, that was my suggestion, because I wanted to convey the planning board's recommendation to have dedicated lanes within the CBD, but then you don't want bus rapid transit lanes that go to nowhere or that don't transition. And so we worked with MCDOT staff actually to look at these cross sections to make sure that they actually made sense connecting even outside of the downtown. This is not meant to be totally prescriptive and that it's the end all be all. There would still need to be detailed engineering and operational studies to make this work if it were a CIP project. But this gives MCDOT kind of a realm and a guidance on what we're looking for and how to achieve those goals. They would ultimately need to determine what makes sense, and that would also come before you all.
Thank you for that. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. Sure. So number one, this is for Glenn, related to what you have just shared, if that's okay. Dr. Orland, she just shared that it's consistent with where we have been, that this confirms basically what the intent has been with the infrastructure for this corridor. Number one, do you agree with that? And number two, if you do agree with that, are you concerned that if we don't go to 120 feet, that we aren't being consistent with what the infrastructure we have is planned? Because one of those two things has to be an issue, right? Either we're not being consistent, or what we have stated before is not, in your opinion, practical, and we need to depart from it in some way, unless I'm missing something.
Well, let me answer it this way. If I'm not answering directly, come back to me. In terms of the number of bus lanes, the dedicated bus lanes, it doesn't have to be consistent within the CBD and outside the CBD. In fact, within the CBD, again, you have a lot more circulation happening going on. You want to have a very defined location for people getting on and off. And there's an advantage to actually having the two bus lanes being there the whole length between Spring Street and the Silver Spring Metro Station, perhaps even as far south as 16th Street. But for north of there, the traffic that's always been projected for Colesville Road is pretty well peaked, or it's not evenly split. There's much more southbound traffic in the morning than northbound, much more northbound traffic in the evening than southbound. And so the BRT buses could run in general lane traffic in the off-peak direction and not suffer much in the way of delay. So that's the trade-off between that and actually taking another lane from the 6-lane cross-section. And no one's arguing for more than 6 lanes. In total, we're not going to go to 7 or 8 in this right-of-way. The alternative, doing that would basically create just the 2 lanes in the peak direction, which will cause real bad congestion problems. In terms of the right-of-way width, there's no reason why it has to be consistent within the CBD and outside the CBD, as long as you're fitting the elements that you need to fit in. If you're fitting in the 6 lanes and sidewalks and a reasonable buffer from between the sidewalk and the curb lane, that should be sufficient. And that's why, 85 feet, I think, would work, because you're talking about 64 feet between the curbs. That leaves another 21 feet, basically on either side of it. That room's for a grass strip and a sidewalk. It seems like that would work. Maybe 90 feet, but certainly not 120, and I think even 110, I think, would cause real distress amongst a lot of the residents who live along in Woodside Park along that roadway.
Appreciate that. The pedestrian buffer, we already talked about dedicated bus lanes, why that's important. The pedestrian buffer matters. I can tell you on every state road, this is an issue. These are older roads. They are hugely dangerous. There have been just countless numbers of collisions. There have been a number of fatalities. I can point to, right down the road from me, Jay Castle. He was killed specifically because there was no buffer on that road. He swerved out of the way of an obstruction, was run over by a car that was doing what the car was supposed to do, going the speed limit and doing everything that cars do on roads. It was a design failure, not a human error on any of the users. We recently had a family of 5, including an infant, that was struck, and it was, I believe, largely related, based on the reports, because there wasn't enough of a buffer to protect from a high-speed collision on a major state highway. We can go on and on and on and talk about it, but so the elements are critical, and it seems like there's no debate about that. I'm just confused. Dr. Orland believes that all the elements can fit into 85 or 90 feet. Planning seems to think that it can't fit in at any less than 120 feet. Can somebody explain to me, where the difference of the 30 to 35 feet comes from, as somebody who is not an expert in road engineering, much less anything, and don't want to try to play one on Zoom?
The difference isn't really the road. The difference is in the sidewalk and the pedestrian buffer. What's being proposed for the sidewalk on both sides is that be widened from 5 feet to 12 feet, which is effectively the width of a hiker-biker trail. The plan doesn't say that it's a hiker-biker trail, but it probably would effectively have that function. And the other is that the buffer between the street and the sidewalk would be wider than it is. I'm looking it up as we speak. Katie, maybe you remember off the top here. I think it's, here we go, it's 8 feet what's proposed between the travel lane and the sidewalk, as opposed to 3 to 5 feet. So those are really the differences, and plus the extra couple feet for 4 feet for the bus lanes.
Could I just hear from Katie on those elements and why planning believes that the widths that were provided are critical to the elements, and then I'll yield back to the chair.
And can I just also add one thing for you to clarify?
Yeah.
Is this only intended through redevelopment?
Right. No, I think to get the ultimate, it would be through redevelopment. But I do want to emphasize, so where these are coming from is with the Complete Streets Design Guide, which was developed both by planning and MCDOT. These are the minimum widths that are that we believe achieves both our safety and transit reliability goals. I think forgive me for answering a question that perhaps you didn't ask. I think it's okay to have what MCDOT and Dr. Orland suggests as an interim condition, because maybe that's more practicable as a CIP project, but that we still think it makes sense to hold on for a long-term vision, the ultimate 120 feet. And it doesn't necessarily have to look exactly as it's in this supplement here, but we do think that it justifies that 120-foot master plan right-of-way width, and I think that that's important for our long-term goals.
But you have to ask yourself, is the zoning that is being proposed for the properties along Colesville Road between Spring Street and Sligo Creek Parkway, is the plan basically proposing that those residential developments, houses be redeveloped?
I'm sorry, did you want to jump in here before I say something, or?
Sure. So the actual plan boundary only goes 2 blocks north of Spring. The rest of what's north of that is covered under other master plans, which are on our work plan and will be coming up again in the near future. I know we're not really talking about Thrive because it's still at the council, but I will just like to say that even though we're not referencing it directly in this plan, obviously we see Colesville as a corridor, and we know that that's consistent with sort of the overall view of Thrive and the direction that planning has been taking in years. And so I think we are looking at this and saying, taking the long-term view, we do expect that over the life of this plan that there may be some change both in the zoning, the land use, and the development over that corridor of Colesville. Just looking at the way we're looking at things in the county as a whole right now, even if it's not directly something that we're rezoning in this plan, as something we have even talked about at length in these work sessions, and we only, this plan only gets to go that 1 block. But we are sort of taking the view that 1 block is not going to be perhaps in the future as stark of a transition in terms of land use and development as it is today as you head into downtown Silver Spring. So I'll just say that's sort of the broader planning context for what we're thinking about.
Could I just say one quick follow-up, Tara, but the plan says that the street supplement that you submitted later will replace the pages in the plan now. So it will be part of the plan. Even though the plan boundary only goes, like you said, 2 blocks north, the plan would be calling for this cross-section to extend all the way to Sligo Creek Parkway. It would be.
I think that's sort of we may need to, Kid, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's responding to the way the segments are designated in the Complete Streets Guide.
Yeah, we can't change.
But we can't actually change anything outside the plan boundary in the plan.
Well, we did that because, and we do this in other plans, because we recognize transportation infrastructure doesn't stop at the plan boundary, so we show it, but that doesn't mean that there's any legal implication to it. We have to go through a master planning process, but it would be bizarre if we just sort of like drew a line on the map where there's dragons over the edge of the earth. We're trying to show how it would work, not to imply that we're changing it.
Well, prior plans actually does have legal basis. You can show rights of way beyond the boundary of the plan. If it's transportation, it goes to a certain point. That has occurred in other plans. So it's one or the other. It's either you're talking about this 120 feet all the way to Sligo Creek Parkway. If it's just a couple blocks north, then that ought to change in those cross sections in the supplement. And so then it would certainly, yes, it would have a lot less impact than what I've been talking about.
Well, but, and forgive me if this is what you're already saying, but already in the master plan of highways, it is 120 feet master plan. I'm pulling up the segment right now between Fenton Street and Sligo Creek Parkway. So that crosses across the boundary and goes, that's essentially where our cross sections are. So, I mean, I think that we thought we were being clear and fair. If it makes sense to put some more caveat language specifically to those cross sections that extend beyond, we're happy to do that to be more clear.
Well, again, just because it's in the current master plan doesn't necessarily make it. We're now getting a closer look at this. And I don't think that section north of Spring Street, or at least north of a block north of Spring Street, should be any more than 85, maybe 90 feet. I talk too much, sorry. I'll stop.
Well, okay, rocking a hard
100
place
feet
here.
it is.
What's that?
100 feet it is.
Well, I mean, if I'm understanding this correctly, the vision here is that if the properties along the edge of Colesville were to redevelop, which is not presently zoned in this plan, if they were to redevelop to support the kind of housing that we, envision in other conversations, then you would want to do this so that when those properties rezone or redevelop, they have to provide the right of way. However, we're not presently, this plan doesn't change that zoning. So it's, I'm inclined to support the planning recommendation here to move the ball forward, but it's getting murky here. So Atara and Gwen.
So Katie and I feel that, and I'll leave the discussion of the next point to Gwen. I'm sure she's going to address it, but we would be comfortable changing the actual name of that section so that defines only the portion of Colesville that's in the plan boundary. We know that there will be other opportunities to look at the rest of Colesville, not too far in the future, and we're happy to say let's leave that discussion to the master plan that covers that area, and we can have this section that goes. It can just go from South Noise Drive to the. We can leave the section so it stops right at that crossing that we've established, mid-block crossing at the park along Colesville, just those 2 blocks north, and leave our recommendations holding for that. And the rest of Colesville, which is not in this plan, is reasonable to not be addressed in this plan, and we'll address that as it comes. I would say the other thing is,
can I just jump in
yes.
1 second, Atara? I think that's really a very sensible way to approach this. Many of our major corridors have today a master plan right-of-way of 120 feet. And that has been true for Colesville Road for many, many, many years. I think if there is a discussion about narrowing that right-of-way and amending the master plan of highways from 120 feet to something narrower, it requires a more detailed analysis, and that's something we can do in a project that's in our upcoming work program, which is an update to the Silver Spring Communities Plan. But I think that it really is important not to make a decision that's a big decision to change the master plan of highways from 120 to 100 or lower.
So
and
to
I
your
think
point,
we need to do it. The area outside the plan needs to be done as part of the Silver Spring Communities update.
okay, can I just make sure I understand here? So the present right of way is 120 feet. And
Or plan right of way.
what's that?
The master planned right of way is 120 feet. The existing right of way is 85 to 100 feet.
I see, but the master plan of highways calls for 120 feet everywhere. Is that what you're saying, Gwen?
Yes, it does. And as projects have come in the central business district, we've required dedication to achieve the 120-foot right-of-way. We don't know what's going to happen outside the plan boundary, both in terms of zoning and in terms of transportation needs based on that zoning. So I think until we know that, we shouldn't be making decisions outside the plan boundaries.
Okay. So you're revising the recommendation essentially to pull it back to the plan boundary?
Yes, to be clear, I think that was really always our intent. We were trying to show helpfully that our plan boundary cross-section wasn't crazy, that it could work outside the plan boundary if in the future there was ever that kind of growth, but we do not have to show that. We are only working inside the plan boundary.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll echo that. We were just trying to be consistent with the sections per the master plan of highways. We weren't trying to be messy and cut it up again. That's totally fine. We can do that for clarity. That often happens with master plans when the plan boundary changes. So I'd be happy to make that technical change if that works for you.
So if you do that, then essentially the plan is recommending no particular change because it's already what you're doing inside the plan boundary, and outside the plan boundary it doesn't precisely apply, and you're illustrating how it could work.
Correct. And I think if we are ever lucky enough to actually get all of this right of way inside the plan boundary built the way we'd like it to be built, we can look at a way to transition and smooth that cross-section as we get outside the plan boundary, because this is not all going to happen at one time. This is not going to be one giant boulevard project. So I think we are just trying to show that it is possible to smooth from the CBD into the non-CBD area and achieve a good cross-section.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we have a plan then.
I guess the question I've got, I mean, basically what we're talking about is the cross sections in the plan and supplement would only go from up to Noise Drive, as opposed to all the way to Saga Creek Parkway. But also begs the question about the use of the lanes. I mean, are we talking about 2 BRT lanes from Spring Street up to Noise Lane, and then it transitions? Well, I don't say anything, I guess, about what happens north of there. Is that what the planning staff's proposing?
Well, right now, we again do really feel that the dedicated lanes are important for the BRT. We're trying to show that in the more urban part of Colesville Road. We will have to talk about how that transitions if and when there's ever a full-blown reconstruction project on for BRT on the area of Colesville between the downtown and Sligo.
We're saying that the previous work on this is not really satisfactory. We need to build on it. So the plan is not trying to set the final word on exactly what the lane configuration is, but we want to show those cross sections to show what the objective is.
Okay. All right. Sounds like common ground.
So again, the committee's recommendation is to go with 120 feet north Noise Lane. Okay. Mr. Friedson, Mr. Delano, you're okay with that?
Well, yes, but with the big cap, we're going to look at the larger issue.
What is the caveat? How is that expressed again?
Yeah.
Basically, I think what we're saying is we aren't changing the right of way from what it is today and what it has been for 30 years. What we are saying is that that works very well in the urban area, which is the planned boundary, and that we will explore the appropriate right of way outside of the planned boundary when we take up the Silver Spring Communities Plan.
Can we say consistent with the master plan of highways? Isn't that what we're referencing here?
Well, yes, it is 120 feet in the master plan of highways and has been that for many, many, many years. We're not changing it.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I would personally prefer if we kept that language in, because that's what we're using to base this on. We're not creating a new right-of-way concept here. In fact, if we reduced it, it would be creating a new right-of-way concept. And then if we wanted to include the additional caveat language from outside the plan boundary, I'm not sure if that's even appropriate.
Is there a number? Right. I mean, Glenn, you said we're saying 120 feet north of noise, but is there actually a number? We're just saying this is a good looking street width design, but we're not deciding it now, right?
Well, if as long as it's 120 feet, if there's any dedication of right of way to be gone, the planning board will take 120 feet, the extra feet to get to 120 feet over the existing 85 to 100 feet. And that, of course, you can only have a consistent right of way if there's dedications for all those properties along there, or if the county or the state goes in and buys the properties.
But as a point of clarification, if something were to happen today, before the passage of this plan, because the 120 feet is the standard in the master plan of highways, planning is already doing that. Am I mistaken?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
In fact, it happened a couple months ago.
Yeah, I think it's very important that the language and consensus language between council staff and planning staff would be great here, as seems to be the practice, but that we reference the fact that that is consistent with the master plan of highways, to note the fact that the plan itself is not changing the right of way. Because I think if most people listen to this conversation in part, or if they read the packet, they might have the misconception that we were making a decision point on whether to change, to expand the right of way as a matter of practice for planning, and we're not. And so I just think that's important to
maybe it's, yeah, exactly. It's sort of like if you're going to go to 120, this is what you would, this is the concept. However, we're not changing, this plan is not adopting 120.
This plan is taking the existing master plan of highways right of way, which is 120.
Yeah.
Council staff was suggesting a different approach, which is outside the plan boundary to go to a more constrained right of way and to talk about how all of the things that need to fit in that right of way could fit. That's a really good discussion, but I don't think that's a discussion that we have in this plan. I think that's a discussion we have in the Silver Spring Communities Plan, which is in the work program and is coming up. And I actually think Dr. Orland's suggestions might be very good suggestions that should be considered when we get to that plan. But we have to look at it holistically with the transportation issues in that plan, with the zoning issues in that plan. It's a tail wagging the dog of the Silver Spring downtown plan, and
right.
We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Just to be clear, my recommendation really is to go down to an 85-foot right of way north of Spring Street. So between Spring and Noise, it would be 85, not 100 or not 120. But I was just when the comment was made, this should only apply within the planning boundary, then that would extend up to Noise. It still will affect 7 or 8 houses, single family houses along there.
So rather, we will be silent on this and allow the issue to be addressed in the future.
Now, the only thing it sounds like would change would be from what the committee seems to be headed, and the planning staff is recommending, and the board and Mr. Anderson, is that one the cross section that shows in here would only go to Noise Lane as opposed to going to Sligo Creek Parkway.
Okay. Sounds fine. Okay. Well, we're definitely going to call it for a day. Okay.
So pick up the rest on Friday, then, I guess, right?
Is that what we have reserved Friday?
I think Monday.
Friday morning, I believe, is the next work session.
I think it got moved.
Oh, it got moved? Oh, sorry.
Friday. I know we have one on Monday. So is this on the schedule for Monday?
Yes.
All right. So we do not have PHED on Friday at all?
No, it was not a time when everyone could be available. So we will be meeting Monday the 4th and Thursday the 7th.
Monday the 4th, Thursday the 7th in the morning. Thursday in the morning?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you Monday.
to Detroit, Roy.